G'day, May 40 here. So last night I watched this new movie on Netflix called Train Dreams. It's based on an acclaimed Dennis Johnson novel, and not a lot goes on. It's about a bloke growing up in Iowa and becoming a man and living his life largely in Iowa and working as someone who cuts down trees. He's a lumberjack. And the movie hit home for me because this guy basically depended on either his work or his family, his marriage, to give him community and to give him connection to other people. And when his work went away and when his family went away, then he was alone and incredibly vulnerable to the world. And so this hits home to me because I've often tried to take the easy way out for social connection. I grew up at a Seventh-day Adventist college in Australia, Kurrumbong, and we didn't have a phone. And so I would often spend Saturday afternoons yearning for my best friend Wayne's family to stop by after the Sabbath and take me to something cool and fun and social. I largely outsourced my social life to my best friend, and I've repeatedly done that throughout my life. I think one term for this is borrowed functioning. If my friends are operating at a higher social level than I am, and I just go along for the ride, and people will carry me along sometimes for years, but I've been depending upon them. We only reluctantly got a phone in my home, I think when I was 11, because my father initially didn't want one because he didn't want to be bothered, but people would just drive up to see him at Pacific Union College in the Napa Valley, and so he realized that having a phone would minimize his troubles rather than maximize them. And this comes to mind in part because this new movie, Train Dreams, the protagonist never speaks on his phone. He dies in 1967, never speaks on a phone, and he just tries to outsource his social life to his family. And he only gets a family because he was lucky enough that a woman made the first move on him. And that's not a good recipe for success with women if you're a man, depending upon a woman to make the first move. So if you depend on your family, your work, and your religion, right, you need some kind of, I think, third social hub. So if you mean by family, your relation with your siblings and your relatives, your extended family, your parents, if that's all a strong part of your life, then that can fill you up, right? If you have a good family life, extended family life, that can absolutely fill you up and meet all your social needs. And I think this is how we were evolved. And if that fits your social needs, then that's it. And then work is just a bonus on top of that. In highly mobile countries like the United States and Australia, you may not have those close extended family ties. And so usually people need something beyond family and work. The religion or various communities, volunteer communities, service communities, hobby communities, you need something else. And then the other thing that haunted me about this movie is the depiction of its treatment of Chinese immigrants, and one is depicted being thrown off a bridge, presumably to his death, and it's just horrifying when you think about these massacres of Chinese immigrants to the United States. And America depended upon Chinese immigrants to get some essential things done, such as, I think, the Trans-Pacific Railway, because they worked harder and more efficiently and more effectively than the American workers. So you have a minority group that pours into the country, it does valuable work, it's needed, and then as soon as it's no longer needed, it becomes vulnerable, and these horrible massacres take place. But there were never massacres, according to ChatGPT anyway, against Japanese immigrants, because the Japanese immigrants were more family-centered than the Chinese immigrants, and it's harder to kill people who have extended kinship ties. Also, the Japanese built institutions. As soon as they moved, they built institutions, and Japanese immigrants have always been intensely patriotic to their new country wherever they've moved in the world, whether it's Brazil or the United States or Australia. They tend to become hyper-patriots, which strongly reduces the incentive to hurt them. And so the Japanese built institutions and developed families much more in comparison to Chinese immigrants, and that made them much less vulnerable. So the best deterrent for being badly treated is to be embedded in thick social ties, and so other people will look out for you. And this particularly hits home for me because I think of my Uncle Val, who became a communist, and so he was always on the outs of polite society, but he was married until about 1989 when his wife died of breast cancer, and then he lived alone after that. And then about 20 years ago, he rolled off his bed in the middle of the night, got tangled up in his blankets, and he couldn't get out. And it was 2 or 3 days until someone stopped by and rescued him and got him an ambulance and sent him off to the hospital. But can you imagine just rolling off your bed, getting tangled up in your blankets, and being that vulnerable? I remember when I was about 25, I rolled out of bed in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and something happened in my back, so I could not get up. And I was living with my parents at the time, but my parents were gone, and we lived in a fairly isolated area. We had 7 acres, and so I was like screaming for help for an hour, and of course no one could hear me. And so eventually I was able to maneuver myself back into bed. But what a nightmare to be that vulnerable. There have been times for most of my life after that, there'd be at least one time a year where my lower back would go out and I would just be bedridden for a couple of days until the spasms would release itself. Thank God that hasn't happened to me since 2018 when I learned strain counter-strain therapy. But I hate that feeling of extreme vulnerability, and a good reality check of your thick connections is how long till people will miss you, right? If you don't show up, how long till someone will come knocking to see what the heck is going on with you? So here is some of John Mearsheimer's analysis of the Trump peace plan.
2 weeks, decisions will be made that determine whether your children grow up in a stable world or one lurching toward great power conflict. I'm not being dramatic. I'm being precise. Right now, negotiators are finalizing a peace proposal for Ukraine that most analysts are calling just another attempt at diplomacy. They're catastrophically wrong. This isn't about ending one war. It's about choosing between 2 completely incompatible visions of European security. And here's the part that should keep you up at night. There's no middle ground. One side has to lose. I've spent decades studying how great powers behave when their core interests collide. What I'm watching unfold right now isn't normal diplomacy. This is the kind of moment that shows up in history books with a before and after, the kind where future generations will ask, how did they not see what was coming? But in this video, I'll take you through what most people don't see coming. But first, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Let me start by explaining what we're actually dealing with. In mid-November, reports emerged about a 28-point peace proposal that had been drafted with input from Russian.
There's something about international relations specialists who tend to be really good at speaking. They recognize that the need for their specialty is not as obvious as it is for, say, an engineering specialist, and so they've all got really good at self-promotion.
Officials. The initial version sent shockwaves through European capitals and Kyiv. It called for Ukraine to surrender significant territory in Donetsk that it still controls, cap its military at 600,000 troops, constitutionally renounce NATO membership, and accept Russian control over Crimea and the Donbass. In exchange, the plan offered economic reconstruction funds, a return to pre-war trade relationships, and vague security guarantees from the United States. To many observers, it looked like a Russian wish list dressed up as American diplomacy. Now, after intensive negotiations in Geneva and Abu Dhabi, that plan has been whittled down to 19 points. Some of the most egregious provisions have been removed, but here's what I need you to understand. The fundamental problem with this plan isn't in the specific points. It's in the entire framework of how we've been thinking about this conflict from the beginning. I've been arguing since 2014 that the West, particularly the United States, bears primary responsibility for this crisis. We marched NATO eastward despite explicit warnings from Russian leaders that they would view this as an existential threat. We ignored the basic principles of great power politics and assumed we could remake Europe's security architecture without accounting for Russian interests. And when Russia responded exactly as one should have predicted, we acted shocked and blamed Putin's supposed imperial ambitions. This peace plan, in its current form, tries to solve a problem we created while refusing to acknowledge the root cause. And that's why I believe it's doomed to fail unless we fundamentally change our approach. Let me be very clear about something that too many people in Washington still don't understand. When NATO announced at its 2008 Bucharest summit that Ukraine would eventually join the alliance, Russia heard an existential threat, not a potential threat, not a future concern, an immediate existential threat to their security. I'm not asking you to sympathize with Russia. I'm asking you to understand how great powers think and behave. Russia has been invaded from the West repeatedly.
All right, some good realism here from John Mearsheimer.
Throughout its history. The idea of a hostile military alliance placing troops, missiles, and military infrastructure on its border with Ukraine, which has a 1,200-mile frontier with Russia, was never going to be acceptable to Moscow. Never. When I say this was an existential threat, I mean it in the most literal sense. From Russia's perspective, NATO and Ukraine would be like Russia forming a military alliance with Mexico and placing troops and missiles along the Rio Grande. The United States would not tolerate that for 1 second, and Russia was never going to tolerate NATO expansion into Ukraine. This is why Putin launched his preventive war in February 2022. He wasn't trying to rebuild the Soviet Empire or fulfill some grand imperial vision. He was trying to prevent Ukraine from becoming a de facto member of NATO, which is exactly what was happening under the Biden administration. The strategic logic was brutally simple. Better to fight now when the situation might still be manageable than to wait until Ukraine is fully armed and backed by NATO. Now, many people will object to this analysis. They'll point to Putin's speeches about historic.
And it's interesting, this new timestamp here, where John Mearsheimer talks about the weaknesses in his framework.
Pause here and be intellectually honest about something. My framework, what I call offensive realism, has significant blind spots, and I need to acknowledge them. I predicted as early as 2014 that NATO expansion would lead to disaster in Ukraine. I've argued repeatedly that the United States and its European allies bear primary responsibility for creating the conditions that led to war. I've advocated for a settlement that acknowledges Russian security interests while ending the bloodshed. And I stand by all of that analysis. But my approach focuses almost entirely on great power competition and security interests. And in doing so, it tends to treat smaller states like Ukraine as objects rather than agents, pieces.
So I love what Mearsheimer is doing here, and I love what Charles Darwin did in The Origin of Species, talk about the weaknesses in his approach. It just makes you much more credible. And one thing that I loved about Charles Darwin's Origin of Species is he repeatedly gave examples of what would invalidate his perspective. And so if you can offer evidence that would falsify your thesis, all right, if there was evidence that would show this, if there was evidence that would show that, and that would completely falsify my thesis, it's just a very powerful, intellectually honest way of presenting things.
To be moved around the board by great powers. This misses something important. Ukrainians have agency. They have preferences. They've chosen repeatedly to align with the West rather than with Russia. You can't just dismiss that as NATO manipulation or Western propaganda. Ukrainians have genuine reasons for wanting to join Western institutions, and those reasons are rooted in their historical experience with Russian domination.
All right, that's a good proviso on John Mearsheimer's offensive realism doctrine. So, Tucker Carlson, that's the subject. That's the headline for today's show. And one quick question that we might be asking, is Tucker more or less influential now compared to when he was live on Fox News most every weeknight? And it seems that the mainstream media has delighted in pointing out that Tucker is much less influential now than he used to be. And I much prefer the more nuanced perspective here of ChatGPT that Tucker is less broadly influential, but more intensely influential. So on Fox, Tucker sat in America's nightly living rooms, right? He reached millions of passive viewers who were not always looking for him specifically, right? He was reaching an older audience, a bunch of retirees, suburban conservatives, and habitual Fox watchers, and he shaped the GOP's center of gravity because he controlled the 8 p.m. pipeline, and his monologues were the most talked about discussion points of the day regularly. And so Republican politicians in particular worried about his monologues. Candidates feared his disapproval. Staffers scrambled when he singled them out. So Tucker had broadcast era power. It was wide, it was soft, it was unavoidable. Now his reach is narrower, but deeper. Tucker has a more fervent following, a more loyal following than Donald Trump. Tucker no longer commands the mass audience that Fox guaranteed. Tucker isn't shaping the whole Republican Party every night, but the people who follow him now are the most engaged, right? They go out of their way to follow him. They treat him less like a TV host, more like a prophet, more like an independent narrator. Tucker now focuses on mood rather than news. Right? He's not interested in the day-to-day of politics and passing legislation. Right? Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham are not tracking his commentary. Fox is no longer taking cues from him. The big donors aren't calling staffers after one of his segments. But his influence over the New Right coalition is probably stronger. So the post-Fox News right, downwardly mobile young men, post-liberal intellectuals, the populist influencer class often treat him as a spiritual anchor. Right? They see him as someone who left the system and sharpened his voice. So for millions of Americans, Tucker now has a credibility he never had as a Fox News employee. So within the GOP power structure, less influential. Inside the rising online populist right, more influential. So his reach shrank, his authority grew. Now, where is the American right going? If the future belongs to the American conservative donor class, to the GOP establishment, then Tucker was the peak. If the future belongs to the online populist ecosystem, then post-Fox Tucker may be the early stage version of something much larger and much more significant. And the antithesis of Tucker is Ben Shapiro. And so here he is at a TICFA conference, I think sponsored by the Call Me Back podcast with Dan Senor. I'm a regular listener to it. There's a discussion here between Ben Shapiro, Bari Weiss, and Dan Senor. And I just find this so amusing. It starts off with Ben castigating white Christian men for embracing victimhood, but then pretty much the entire hour is about Jewish victimhood. So when Jews embrace victimhood, that's good, but when non-Jewish white Christian men embrace victimhood, it's pathetic.
Conservatism, you have a sort of classically conservative vision of what America is. So a meritocracy, a place that's based in traditional biblical virtue, what we used to call Judeo-Christian virtue.
All right, Judeo-Christian is a construction of a particular point in time. So post-World War II until recently, all right, Judeo-Christian was widely used, but the idea that this is just a classical part of conservatism is ridiculous, that individualism is a classical part of classical conservatism, ridiculous. Conservatism started out with aligning with the power structures in Europe, the monarchy and the church. And the European right was historically much less friendly to Jews than the European left.
Based on both the Old Testament and the New Testament, and a belief that in America, you could get ahead if you tried, that there was, in fact, a logic.
Right. The idea that this is some kind of classical conservative or right-wing value is silly. There's not a right-wing essence. There's not a conservative essence. Whatever is right-wing or conservative depends on the particular situation it finds itself in.
To the universe, and if you followed the rules, then you would do well in America. freedom, virtue, meritocracy. These were what American conservatism was built upon. The Constitution of the United States embeds these values in the systems by which we live and to our government. That's sort of the classical version. And then there's the new version, and it's not conservative, it's just reactionary. And in order to understand what's happening with the young people who are falling into nihilism, I think you first have to understand what they are reacting to. What they are reacting to is a perception that over the course of the last couple of decades, white Christian men in particular have been targeted by elite members of the media and of government for particular ire and possibly destruction. That is the feeling that has arisen among young white Christian men, particularly. The idea being that if you're white, you were victimized by DEI. This arose to the top during 2020, during BLM summer. That if you were a man, that you've been targeted by the idea that masculinity is inherently bad, and therefore men need to feminize themselves, or they need to be written out of the social compact. They have to be treated as inherently toxic. And Christian, the idea being that Christians are a threat, and Christianity is inherently bigotry, and therefore Christianity has to be put to the side or crushed. Now, there's always a seed of truth in a lot of this, actually. But the reaction to that should be freedom of religion, traditional virtue, meritocracy. That's the normie response. The normie conservative response to that would be, yes, all of that's happening and it's bad. And the response to that should be that you should be, for example, a good Christian, right? If you're a young Christian man, you should be a good Christian who believes in Christian principles and then pursues those in accordance with traditional virtue. That if you don't...
So this notion that people are ever primarily driven by abstract universal philosophical principles is absurd. People are primarily driven by ties, by connections, by bonds, by the people who they love the most and who love them. People are inherently tribal.
Like the treatment of some race above others, you should...
So it's kind of amusing listening to Ben Shapiro make the case here against tribalism.
Pursue a colorblind meritocracy, that if you're somebody who doesn't...
We did not evolve to be colorblind. Now, we can employ a colorblind attitude when necessary, when that's socially necessary. All right, we have incredible flexibility due to our brains, but the notion that this is just an inherent part of people, that we just evolved to be colorblind and only bad people propagandize regular Americans out of that is absurd. Right? We evolved to be intensely tribal and to be most at ease with people who are most like us, and to be most at ease with people who are the most different from us.
Doesn't like being treated as lesser for being a man. You should actually act as a traditionally masculine.
So it's a relief to be a situationist, because I broadly agree with Ben Shapiro's worldview, but I feel no desire to either praise Ben Shapiro or damn Ben Shapiro. Ben is good at some things, bad at other things, just like all the rest of us. Nick Fuentes is good at some things, bad at other things. Tucker Carlson, good at some things, bad at other things. So Ben Shapiro is not a scholar. He's not an intellectual. He is someone who's good at reciting talking points very rapidly and coming across as profound to his partisan, parochial, midwit audience.
Man, meaning defend, protect, get married, have kids, build, right? And instead...
Just like Andrew Tate, right?
And the Andrew Tate thing is a great comp for what's happening with Fuentes. Fuentes is the political version of Andrew Tate. It's just to burn it all down, right? We hate all of this. All the institutions have been thoroughly destroyed. And so now we just have to get rid of whatever superstructure remains, just tear down the facade. And I think that's what you're seeing so much on the right. Now, that's deeply dangerous. It's also really seductive for young men who are now being told something that is the most seductive thing you can say in politics, which is it's not your fault and you have no responsibility to fix it. It's not your fault and you have no responsibility to fix it. Got you Zohar Mamdani in New York. Truly. Like him going out and saying affordability over and over.
Guess what? When it comes to national politics or big city politics, it's not your fault and it's not your responsibility to fix it. You have no ability to fix it. You're a single human being. Your vote really matters. All right. So Ben is just preaching against reality. What goes on in any race where, let's say, there are more than 100 votes is not your fault and probably not your responsibility to fix it. Right? Most people would be much better off putting their time, energy, and resources into something other than politics.
As though if he said it 3 times straight, like Beetlejuice, it would just appear. What he was really just saying was affordability, everything's too expensive, and don't worry, it's not your fault. Give me more power and I will fix it for you by destroying.
He was saying many things, but perhaps what was most important was that he gave a vibe that people could relate to. right? I don't share any of Zoran Mamdani's politics to the best of my knowledge, but I just find him incredibly likable. When you just experience his videos, you just feel like this is someone who gets it, and this is someone who's likable.
Everything. And that's a very seductive political message. I think that politicians on both sides of the aisle and political voices, people like Tucker Carlson.
And so Ben's underlying message here is that people are stupid and they're hoodwinked and they are vulnerable to propaganda. But when it comes to our vital interests, we did not evolve to be gullible. And so whichever way you vote for the mayor of New York City or the mayor of Los Angeles or for president of the United States, it's going to have virtually no effect on the outcome. And so when it comes to people's vital interests, they are not gullible. And it is usually against someone's interest to devote a great deal of their time to things over which they have no control unless they enjoy doing it. I enjoy talking about politics, so that's why I talk about politics. I don't lie to myself that I can have some significant effect on the outcome of politics.
And make a lot of money and do really well by pushing this particular perspective. I think that's the big rift that you're seeing on the right emerging right now.
Bari, you are a student of anti-Semitism. You're a teacher about anti-Semitism in your work. What Ben just described actually follows a classic anti-Semitic.
Oh, can you put yourself in the place of someone who is not Jewish, neither pro-Jewish nor anti-Jewish, and watching this? You would not be swayed towards a more Zionist position.
Paradigm in which you identify this small group of people.
So Dan Senor here on the left, who hosts a podcast that I listen to regularly, it was vital for understanding the war in Gaza, particularly if you have a Zionist perspective. He talks about every day he thinks about the great trauma that there was once a train in New York City where someone stood up and said, "Are there any Zionists on this train?" And so out of all the traumas in life, I would say that's really minor. I would say you've got an incredibly privileged, cushy, comfortable, protected, safe life if that's the major trauma that you're thinking about every day. But Dan Senor would talk about when he speaks to a Jewish audience, because the incentives are to tell your audience that they're victims and that they need stronger in-group identity. He talks about what a trauma that was and how he thinks about that every single day.
People over there, and it's their fault. And I wonder what role you think anti-Semitism is actually playing in the right battles.
Well, Ben sort of articulated it, which is the choice right now, and I hope that...
So anti-Semitism is a fancy term given for people who are critical of Jews. And most of the time, people are not seeking out to hate Jews. They are standing up for what they love, be it America or Christianity or Islam or their particular tribe that in certain times and places has conflicting interests with Jews. So if your group, who you love, has conflicting interests with Jews, it'd be weird if you didn't have some Jewishly critical or some negative feelings about Jews. Just as it would be weird for Jews if they have intense conflicts of interest in a very small geographic area, that they wouldn't have some negative feelings about the group that is threatening them.
This is now clear to everyone. It is not a choice between right and left. There's no competing anymore between which side is worse, right?
It's kind of amazing that a pro-Zionist propagandist is like in a senior position at CBS News. I mean, I'm Zionist, a fervent Zionist. I love the state of Israel. I want the state of Israel to be strong. But I mean, Bari Weiss has a background in opinion journalism, which is fine. I subscribe to the Free Press. She's really good at what she does. It's just kind of weird that she's got this major position at CBS News. And Glenn Greenwald has some sharp, important things to say at times. And he's utterly deranged at other times.
And here is the video of Bari Weiss explaining her vision of what corporate media should do.
All of us see the moment that we're in. And all of us see that the choices that it feels like we have sometimes, which is Hassan Piker and Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes and, Andrew Tate, the kind of people that are rising in the podcast charts, those don't actually represent our values. And I don't think that they represent the values and the worldview of the vast majority of Americans. And so this is an opportunity to speak for the 75%, for the people that are on the center left and the center right that still believe in equality of opportunity, that still believe passionately in the American project, that still believe in all of the things that everyone in this room believes in, which is liberty and freedom and independence.
So Mark Halperin found this Bari Weiss video just incredibly inspiring, a great path ahead for CBS News. He thinks that she'll be a major asset for CBS News.
Individual responsibility and in the most basic level, the right to know what is actually going on in the world, not the world as propagandists and ideologues imagine it to be, but what's actually going on in the world and in your community, so you can make decisions about where to send your kids.
What's going on in the world is that different groups have different interests, and sometimes those interests will be in competition with the interests of certain sectors of Jewry, just as the interests of certain sectors of Jewry may be in competition with certain sectors of Palestinian world or Lebanon or Saudi Arabia.
It's to school about where to live and about how to vote. That used to just be normal. And the goal of what we're trying to do at CBS is to get back to that normalcy. And I feel incredibly energized and enthusiastic because I think that is where the vast majority of Americans.
I can't think of anyone who loves reporting, loves journalism, who works at CBS News would be inspired by that Bari Weiss commentary.
Americans actually are.
Well, so that articulation of that set of goals to speak into the lives of the 75%.
So it feels good to have a strong in-group identity, right? It feels good to participate in the applause if you're on this side. And I am on this side, right? I broadly agree with the Zionist perspectives of all these people and the organizations that they work for. But you also, if you want to be thoughtful, think, how would this come across, say, to your average American who's not Jewish and neither pro-Jewish or anti-Jewish?
How are you going to do that? What's your strategy for success?
So I think one of the problems is a lot of people have tried to do centrist news. I know this because I am like the target audience for those things. And the reason that they have all failed is it's like trying to force feed spinach down someone's throat, right? It's felt very like tofu, oatmeal. It's like centrist news is choosing the midpoint between every single topic. It's felt like an absence of charisma and identity. And I, as nostalgic as people might be for an era in which 30 million Americans every night watched Walter Cronkite and saw him as the voice of truth, and I understand why they're nostalgic for that. We're not going back to that. So how do you build trust in a moment of unbelievably low trust in all of our public institutions, especially the mainstream press? I don't think it's by pretending like we can go back to having a view from nowhere. I think it's about who's in the room, right? I think it's about redrawing the lines of what falls in the 40-yard lines of acceptable debate and acceptable American politics and culture. And I don't mean that in like a censorious gatekeeping way. I mean...
Yes, you do. Right. That's the problem with the mainstream media, guys. They just have too many voices. They're just too wide, too diverse panoply of voices. That's the problem with CBS News.
Having people that are clearly identifiably on the center left and on the center right in conversation with each other. And we've been doing so much of this at the Free Press. So
just so long as they're pro-Israel.
Was in, where was I? Chicago. Last week, I think, I've lost all track of time, where Dana Lash, former spokeswoman from the NRA, was debating Alan Dershowitz on guns. Now, these are people that have wildly different opinions on the Second Amendment, and yet showing that they can have good faith, very passionate, very charismatic disagreement and still like each other at the end of the day, we think it's important. And so for me, it's always about the curation, like who's in the room, how are you showing centrist news, not as the absence of disagreement and the absence of charisma, but explicitly charismatic and disagreeable, and yet doing it in good faith. And the other way you do it is, by being really honest with your audience. Like,
yeah, as long as everyone is pro-Israel. Wow. Yeah, you can imagine how Glenn Greenwald could go to town with that. So let's go back to the Tucker question, because Tucker is on this interesting journey. He's no longer standard media figure. He's not a Republican Party operator. He's not a policy thinker. He's not a movement builder, right? He's drifting towards this post-party, post-policy politics that's built entirely on narrative, grievance, and the articulation of an alternative reality, right? He's becoming the first major figure on the right who has influence without seemingly any real governing ambition, which probably places him in a very strategic place to be a future president of the United States. So when he was on cable, he had to operate within a certain structure. He had to accommodate advertisers, executives, legal departments, the ghost of Roger Ailes looking over his shoulder. He had to continually balance his populist impulses against the corporate constraints. And senators like Ted Cruz or Tom Cotton would appear on his show. Governors like Kristi Noem or Ron DeSantis needed him. So he's part of the Republican Party ecosystem. Now, he's got his own platform, and he's shed all these Republican expectations of responsibility. He no longer treats the GOP as his lane. He barely covers everyday political work. He doesn't care about political legislation, coalition building. He doesn't care about message discipline. Right? He leans into these long, wandering sermons about elites, corruption, meaning, loneliness, civilizational decline, right? He's got a narrative conviction that gives his audience a diagnosis of the world that just, for his audience, feels deeper than anything coming out of Washington. And his interviews reflect the same drift, right? He's not aiming at policy. He's aiming at creating a world where certain grievances become sacred truths, right? He is developing an alternative frame of legitimacy that operates entirely outside the GOP. So now he is in conflict with Ben Shapiro and Dan Crenshaw, who care about governing, right? They live in a world of committees, legislation, electoral pressure, and they see Tucker drifting to the role once occupied by Glenn Beck during his prophetic phase or Alex Jones at his peak, right? A politics of narrative without any concern about institutions, right? And so they fear that Tucker's audience will be inspired by Tucker and will drift away from political tasks. They fear that he will compete for moral authority and create a space where policy knowledge is absolutely irrelevant. And so Tucker is a Trump loyalist, but he's not a Trump propagandist. He's not a Republican strategist. He's not a Trump advisor. He treats Donald Trump as an archetype, as a mythic figure who reveals the corruption of the system by provoking its fury. Tucker doesn't lend policy support, right? Steve Bannon cares about building structures and institutions and passing legislation. Tucker doesn't bother. So he's become a post-political priest. His power comes from telling stories. His authority comes from diagnosing evil and diagnosing enemies. His audience has come for clarity about the world, not for guidance about politics. So we have a massively influential figure on the American right who can sway hundreds of thousands of people, but seems completely uninterested in any institutional project that would translate this sentiment into political victories. So people in conservatism treat him with this mixture of awe and anxiety. So people like Charlie Kirk and Matt Walsh, they need the Republican Party to work. They need elections. They need donors. They want to build institutions. And Tucker stands above and apart from this world. He doesn't need this world. He increasingly behaves as if he's glad to be rid of it. So he likely represents the future of right-wing politics, not as a political party, not as a series of institutions, not as a platform of policies, but this constellation of charismatic storytellers who offer identity to disaffected citizens without any interest in governing. Right? We have a post-party, post-policy model where the story is everything and the state and the institutions are an afterthought. So it's incredibly unsettling, this Tucker Carlson direction.
All right, so that's Bari Weiss's prescription for how to improve CBS. And I just want to make a couple of notes about that. First of all, you'll note there that every person that Bari Weiss wants to exclude from our discourse, she mentioned Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Hassan Piker. These are all people who have one thing in common. They are critical of the state of Israel and they oppose U.S. financing of Israel. I know it's a huge coincidence. I'm just saying all the people that Bari Weiss wants to exclude from our 40-yard line of mainstream discourse all just so happen to be people who are opposed to the foreign government that Bari Weiss worships above all else. And then the people that Bari Weiss wants to include in our discourse as a way of solving the problems of our republic, and she named Alan.
So I'm a Zionist, but I think Glenn is right here. And I don't always agree with Glenn. I think Glenn is often making ridiculous points. He's more anti-Israel than Israel deserves, in my perspective. But he's right here.
Alan Dershowitz and Dana Leitch, the former NSA spokeswoman, just by coincidence, are all people who revere the state of Israel and want the U.S. to finance and arm the state of Israel. I know that's also just a huge coincidence. I'm just pointing out the coincidence. It's like it's a coincidence that the person who just bought CBS News and installed Bari Weiss as the head of it, Larry Ellison, through his son David, is the largest private donor to the Friends of the IDF.
So I walked around for years with a knitted yarmulke that had FIDF on it. It was just given to me. It means Friends of the IDF. And for years, I didn't think there was any problem, anything wrong with walking around showing your devotion to the military of another nation, right? I wouldn't do that today. I don't think it's well advised. I think if you are a citizen of the United States of America and want to get along optimally with your fellow American citizens, you should never portray yourself as more intensely devoted to another nation than America. So I would not wear that today, right? Still pro-Israel Zionist, but I wouldn't go strutting around showing my devotion to the military of a foreign power. I think that's ill-advised.
That too is a huge coincidence. So you have Bari Weiss saying, look, there are certain people I think have to be excluded from our discourse for the health of the United States. And just coincidentally, whether they're on the left or the right, they all happen to be people critical of Israel and don't want the U.S. funding and arming it. But then conversely, we have to include a lot of people who are going to rejuvenate and revitalize discourse and interest in corporate media. And by coincidence, those people happen to be people who love the state of Israel, have devoted themselves to supporting it, like I have, and who want the U.S. to arm and fund it. So there's that.
So it feels good to be passionately devoted to your in-group, but it's quite easy to lose touch with reality. And it can feel good to call out the hypocrisy of those who are passionate Zionists or the blind spots. And Glenn is good at it, but Glenn also goes too far at times and doesn't make the best case for his point of view.
And there you see it, the Babylon Bee, which is run by people who are fanatically pro-Israel. Their targets these days, it used to be liberals.
I don't think there's anything wrong with being fanatically pro-Israel or fanatically pro-America.
On the left, it's really now sort of the conservative people who are opposed to Israel. And even though Megyn Kelly is not opposed to Israel, she's actually still quite a emphatic supporter of Israel. She's become grouped within the people who are not reliable supporters of Israel by virtue of her refusal to cut off ties with and deplatform people who criticize Israel, including Tucker.
Right. If you bully people because they're not sufficiently pro-Israel, that's a really self-defeating, terrible strategy.
Carlson, including myself, including Candace Owens. So she's now an enemy, not by virtue of her views on Israel, but by the fact that she won't ban and silence and disassociate herself from and cut off friendships over Israel. And as a result, she's now in the Babylon Bee's crosshairs, which really should at this point change its name to the Tel Aviv Bee, because most of what they do is about castigating people who are in some way critics of Israel. And they posted.
So if you want to be an effective warrior for something, you should ask yourself, what would be the effects of what I'm saying? So we listened to Ben Shapiro sketching this white Christian male victim story, then pathologizing it, right? Listing the grievances of this group, that white people feel pushed down by DEI and BLM, and that men feel that they're getting messages that masculinity is bad and Christianity is framed as bigotry that must be crushed. And he says there's a seed of truth to these grievances, but the proper response is philosophical, freedom of religion, traditional virtue, meritocracy, rather than the reactionary burn it all down. And he, I think, accurately portrays the Nick Fuentes, Andrew Tate story as, it's not your fault, you have no responsibility to fix it, right? This is a pretty good definition of toxic victimhood, right? Giving your audience a story that removes all agency and makes failure morally blameless. But then he sketches a Jewish victimhood story and sacralizes it rather than pathologizing it. So when white Christian men are engaging in a victim story, he pathologizes it. But when Jews do it, it's sacred. Right? So he doesn't lay out the Jewish case of victimhood cleanly in one paragraph, but it runs through this entire conversation. So Jews are the historical scapegoat group. They face a surge of anti-Semitism from the left and the right. Right? There's this politics of resentment, and Judaism is this wonderful system that apparently has no negative effects on anybody else. And if you don't live up to the criteria and the duties in Judaism, then there's something wrong with you. And that Nick Fuentes is just some kind of basement-dwelling ridiculous loser whose followers are degraded by his message. And any anti-Israel sentiment, it's a pathology, it's hatred of meritocracy, it's resentment of a successful, strong, high-performing minority. And that's probably part of it, but it's certainly not the sum. Right? Different groups have different interests, so you don't have to be a loser or sick to have negative sentiments about Jews or the Jewish state, because different groups have different interests. So the panelists in the Bari, Weiss, Ben Shapiro, Dan Senor discussion talk about all these other groups who have false victimhood stories, but for the Jews, they have a true victimhood story. And they just go back and forth reinforcing it, and Glenn Greenwald does an excellent job criticizing this.
This last night, Megyn Kelly gets rid of old pager just to be safe, and there you see the image of the pager next to her face. And everyone understands what this means. The pager has become kind of Zionist shorthand for "we're going to blow you up." It's this sick, perverted Zionist joke. Benjamin Netanyahu goes around the world giving out gold and silver pagers, gave one to John Fetterman, gave one to Donald Trump. A few months ago, some conservative Israel fanatic was on CNN with Mehdi Hassan, debating Mehdi Hassan. I'll never forgive anybody who turns Mehdi Hassan into a sympathetic victim. But they were arguing about Israel, and the guy said, be careful that your pager doesn't go off.
So let's reframe that. Mehdi Hassan was essentially calling, I think, Ryan Jadowski a fascist. And in reaction to that, Ryan made that particular joke. So it wasn't about anti-Israel sentiment. So the pager operation, if you hate terrorism, it's one of the most brilliant operations that have ever gone off. Normally, in urban combat, there are about 7 civilian deaths for every terrorist or every member of an enemy armed forces that you kill. The pager operation was overwhelmingly maiming and killing terrorists, and very, very few, remarkably few innocent people got hurt. And so if you simply want targeted military operations, I would think, whatever side you're on, you would applaud the targeted nature of the pager operation. I thought it was brilliant. Even if you're not pro-Israel, even if you're not pro-Jewish, if you simply prefer to have low civilian casualties and primarily have targeted operations that take out members of the enemy's armed forces, I would think that you'd have respect for it.
So this has become a way of threatening people or implying strongly that
it's not a threat. It's not usually a threat. It seems bizarre. It's a joke talking about a highly specialized, capable, amazing, meticulous operation that was pulled off by the IDF.
they're terrorist sympathizers and that they are legitimate targets.
Yeah, so someone in the chat said, if you're pro-Israel, you're pro-pedophilia. And for me, that's across the line. So I enjoy pretty rambunctious debate and discussion. But if you want to go that far, right, you're not welcome on the channel. I can't have Kip back. All right, Kip was just so far over the top. He could have made the same points that he made last week without just being so crudely anti-Jewish and anti-Asian. I live in society, and there is a type of conversation that is socially unacceptable. And when you want to say that if you're pro some group, that means if you're pro some people, right? If you're pro-Turk or you're pro-Arab or you're pro-Jewish, and therefore that means you're pro-pedophilia, right? That's That crosses my line.
And the Babylon Bee deleted it. With all the Republican and right-wing discourse about how careful you have to be with your language, about blaming the left for using intemperate language when describing the right, and people like Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, this is how conservatism paved the way for the rise of the alt-right, because conservatives complained so much about accusations of racism, and they complained about censorship, that people took up that mantle and then pressed it further. And Conservatism Incorporated found that they couldn't push the toothpaste back into the tube.
And therefore creating a climate where political violence is now acceptable. To have one of these right-wing organs so blatantly play with issues of political violence simply because now Megyn Kelly is their enemy because she won't cut off ties with.
So I think that Glenn is being over the top here. I don't think that the Babylon Bee was threatening Megyn with death.
With everybody who criticized Israel, it's hypocritical at best. I mean, that's like the mildest critique I could offer it, and I think it's pretty demented. It's clearly meant as some kind of a threat to put in Megyn Kelly's head, other people's heads. Hey, remember, Israel can kill people in the most ingenious ways. Now, that pager attack was disgustingly celebrated as some great progress of humanity.
Why would you not celebrate an attack that overwhelmingly killed combatants and comparatively killed so few civilians? I think 2 civilians were killed in that attack.
Even though, obviously, if you blow up pagers, thousands of them, throughout suburbs in Beirut, you're going to end up probably killing some.
So what method would have killed a higher percentage of combatants and a lower number of civilians? I can't think of any other military method when you're fighting for the survival of the state of Israel. What method would be superior? If you rain down bombs, if you invade, there's no other method that would have such a low civilian casualty rate. So if you care about civilian deaths, why would you not applaud such a targeted attack?
Some Hezbollah operatives are maiming some, but huge numbers of people who aren't. And they're women and children who had their eyes blown off, who had their multiple fingers blown off, whose hands are completely maimed. Kids who died, they were around the pager. The pager was on the table where they were. So congratulations on such a great humanitarian achievement.
All right, so name a military method that would have a lower civilian death toll. Name one. He can't.
It's like those guys who were IDF soldiers who got caught on video gang raping a Palestinian detainee.
There is no video of IDF soldiers gang raping a Palestinian detainee. There is video of a group of IDF soldiers taking a Palestinian detainee behind a wall. Right? There's absolutely no evidence that he was gang raped, but Glenn goes with the most lurid option possible.
They're now celebrated as heroes. They go into rooms.
They are celebrated in heroes because the institutional left in Israel tried to make the case that they were gang raping this detainee without any evidence. And so they were persecuted in a particularly vicious way. And when Israel was fighting for survival in Gaza and against Hezbollah, and then these people on the most flimsy pretexts are rounded up and imprisoned and accused of gang rape without any evidence, yeah, these people become beloved by those who don't like this kind of excess.
In Israel, and people stand and cheer for them. Members of the
people in Israel are not cheering for these guys because they gang raped a Palestinian detainee. There is zero evidence that they gang raped a Palestinian detainee. They're cheering for these guys because they were screwed over by the Israeli system, where institutions are still largely in the control of the left. But this is Glenn with a lot of sharp comments on the real goal of the MAGA civil war over Tucker Carlson.
By definition, he's 80. How connected to internet culture is he really? Why would he know Nick Fuentes? Nick Fuentes isn't on Fox News, which he watches, or any of the networks. Usually if you're not on TV, Trump doesn't really pay much attention to you. Nick Fuentes isn't on TV. And so when Trump used to say things like, I don't know Nick Fuentes, I don't know this person, I don't know that person, I don't know what the Proud Boys are, I used to wonder, is that true? Trump is, whatever else you think of him, he's very politically connected and very shrewd, and he doesn't want to lose the significant part of the right-wing movement that has turned on Israel and that has really believed in the America First agenda, even if Trump doesn't. And he understands the difficulty.
So Israel has occupied a sacred role in the United States, in American politics in particular, since the 1960s. And so you would figure there has to be a reaction to that eventually, because different countries have different interests, right? American interests and Israeli interests at times conflict, right? They are rarely identical. And so this kind of blowback was inevitable.
He has with his base, and this is him saying, yeah, I'm not going to denounce Tucker. Tucker's talking about how he regularly speaks to Trump still, how he says the relationship is as good as ever. He doesn't want to lose Tucker Carlson as somebody who's just going to jump through a hoop and publicly denounce on command from some liberal journalist. And he's saying, look, Tucker has to talk to people. That's his job. He has to talk to controversial people. Now, there have been some disputes between Tucker and Trump in the past, particularly over Tucker's opposition to some of Trump's policies, including bombing Iran. Here was Tucker talking to Steve Bannon in June of 2025. They were talking about how if the United States under Trump got involved in Israel.
So people love believing that there's a magic key that unlocks reality. Comment in the chat right now. The sacred role of Israel in American politics is all about the Benjamins. No, it's not just all about the Benjamins. It's about different factors. There's not one magic key. It's not just donations. Consider the largely impotent nature of the conservative donor class. Donald Trump mounted a hostile takeover of the Republican Party and then of the American political establishment. The conservative donor class lost touch with Republican voters, and they have very, very little power, even though they've got the money, but they don't have much power or influence. So power and influence cannot simply be boiled down to money. Sometimes power and influence is primarily financial, but many times there are other factors.
Wars with Iran, it could destroy the MAGA movement and the Trump presidency. And here you see the title, Tucker and Steve Bannon respond to Israel's war on Iran and how it could destroy MAGA forever. So Tucker was very outspoken both before and after Trump's decision to enter the war by bombing Iran. And finally, Trump had enough and went on Truth Social, June 16, 2025. Somebody please explain to kooky Tucker Carlson that, quote, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And then he was asked about that, and he gave a view about how, look, Tucker's not even on TV anymore, kind of dismissing Tucker's importance. I think he realized now Tucker remains not just as influential, but way more influential since he liberated himself from that graveyard known as Fox News and went into independent media where his...
So here are the topics I was thinking of covering this morning. How the right fragments, not MAGA versus the establishment, but the various tribes inside MAGA, and who draws status from which ritual space. Why Nick Fuentes frightens mainstream conservatives, even though he has no institutional power. The Tucker question, is he drifting towards a post-party, post-policy model of politics built on narrative and grievance rather than governance? Why the Ben Shapiro empire is struggling to shape the conservative movement. The limits of this mid-wit policy-driven content in a charisma-driven era. Thought about talking about the right's masculinity revival. What is real? What is a LARP? What's just marketing to lonely men? Future of Christian nationalism. Difference between theology and vibe. Why so many young men bounce between online far-right spaces and self-help culture. What's the emotional logic behind this? The conservative donor class has lost control. How did this happen? Why did popular influences fill the vacuum? Why can the GOP not settle on a coherent foreign policy? We've got the restraint crowd, we've got crusading, we've got the old right versus the new right, and Trump is a gravitational pull. The post-liberal temptation, why so many young intellectuals flirt with post-liberalism without committing to its costs. Culture war fatigue, reshaping conservative media. People want connection and belonging, not just more outrage. The right's class split. Upper and middle class suburban conservatives versus the downwardly mobile white young men. Why is there always a new villain influencer on the right? Cycle of outrage, banishment, return. What is RFK Jr.'s strange crossover appeal among right-leaning audiences? What it reveals about our distrust of institutions, the new forms of right-wing spirituality. We've got esoteric trad content, masculinity rituals, all driven by the desire for meaning. The right's immigration dilemma. Voters want restriction, donors want labor, politicians can't reconcile these two competing desires. Why the conservative movement rarely produces stable institutions. Charisma beats structure. The rise of parallel institutions. We do have a rise in right-leaning media, right-leaning schools, finance, health. Is it sustainable? Why Trump remains the center of gravity even for his critics. He creates the ritual space everybody else orbits. The new right's obsession with authenticity. So Tucker comes across as authentic. Nick Fuentes comes across as authentic, and these people gain enormous audiences because they feel a vital need. So those are just some of the topics.
His reach is far greater and far more diverse and far younger than ever. And it is true that Trump met with Nick Fuentes, with Kanye West, and afterwards when Trump was criticized, I have no idea who Nick Fuentes was, Kanye brought him. But here was Nick Fuentes explaining to Tucker what actually happened at that dinner.
I said, I think you're one of the greatest living Americans. I said, I'm a young guy. I said, I really have nothing to say other than thank you. I have nothing but gratitude for what you've done for the country. I said, it's really not my place, to give you advice or correct you. And he said, no, don't be bashful. Tell me. And the story that I brought up was, this was really what sent me. In the first Fox News debate in 2015, in the Republican primary,
yes,
Bret Baier, the first question, said, raise your hand if you will not pledge to support the eventual nominee.
Yes.
And Trump raised his hand because that's what he was saying. He said, if I don't win, I'll run independent and I'll make Republicans lose. And so I brought that up and I told that story and I said, I feel like what was inspiring in 2016 is that.
So Nick lives the life of a monk. He doesn't have a family. He doesn't have any commitment to institutions. His Christianity is performative more than real. He's not part of any concrete Christian community. And so the weaker your ties to other people, the less need you have for institutions and the more incentivized you are to his attitude of just burn it all down, right? The better the quality of your life, the less inclined you are towards burn it all down. Right? It's people who are losing out life who want to burn it all down.
You were willing to let the Republican establishment lose. Like you were serious about blowing them up, such that you are not going to say, like Pat Buchanan,
right? If there's anything good in your life, if there's anything that you want to protect in your life, you will not publicly align with Nick Fuentes because he will put that in danger.
I respect, but Sam Francis acknowledged that was one of his great mistakes, was ultimately endorsing Bush. I said, it showed you were serious. You were playing to win because you said, I will let this Republican Party crash and burn. I want to run as the Republican, but if I can't, I'll run independent. I said, and that's how I knew you were serious. And that's how I knew you were the guy. I said, and I feel like lately, this was right after Ronna McDaniel became the head of the RNC again. I was like, I feel like lately you're just behind all these people. I said, we're not here for Kevin McCarthy. We're not here for Ronna McDaniel or Mitch McConnell. I said, we are here for you. Like, we will die for you. We are loyal to you. I said, and when you did that, that showed you could win, and we rallied.
So it's fascinating to see the more Conservatism Incorporated tries to battle and put down Nick Fuentes, it seems like the stronger he gets. He has no institutional power. He has no PAC. He has no major donors. He has no elected allies. He has no foothold in Conservatism Incorporated. Yet he scares conservatives, right? Far more than bigger and better funded actors, right? Why are conservatives so afraid of Nick Fuentes, right? It comes from what he represents, not from what he controls. He frightens them because he exposes the soft spots in their coalition. Right, people like Ben Shapiro and Dan Crenshaw put forward this image of the right as respectable and patriotic and focused on policy. And Fuentes rejects that framing. He talks to young men who feel they have no stake in existing institutions, so he can mock the old guard without restraint. Right, he breaks the tone rules that mainstream conservatives depend on. He doesn't apologize, doesn't play the game, he doesn't play by their rules. Right, and that makes him a threat to their brand, even if he doesn't hold institutional power. Right? He taps into a demographic that the Conservatism Incorporated media do not know how to reach. You've got the Daily Wire, National Review, Fox News. They're built for more upwardly mobile adults with something to lose, right? Nick Fuentes speaks to downwardly mobile young men who feel shut out and have nothing to lose. So people like Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh see this audience slipping from their grasp, right? They fear that Nick Fuentes shows these men a world where conservative institutions are weak and irrelevant. And so the status loss hits harder than the policy disagreements. Nick uses taboos as a ladder. Right? The mainstream right knows how fragile their relationships with donors and advertisers are, and so they're very afraid of being edgy. Tucker Carlson got away with pushing boundaries because he had the largest audience in cable news, but he had a heck of a time getting any advertisers, and eventually he got canned. Nick Fuentes pushes boundaries. He's not afraid, and that comes across, right? The main talking heads in Conservatism Incorporated are afraid of saying anything that can be construed as racist. Nick speaks and he makes it look easy because he's not afraid. So Charlie Kirk would try to police the line and Nick Fuentes would call him a gatekeeper. There's just so much anxiety inside Turning Point, Daily Wire, PragerU, similar groups in Conservatism Incorporated, because the Nick crowd do not have their anxieties and fears. Also, Nick gets to appear more pure. When you operate in the real world with competing responsibilities, you cannot be as pure as if you have no standing in American institutions and you have nothing to lose, right? Nick Fuentes has no family. He's not connected to any real world community. He's got nothing to lose. And so he can take loyalty tests further and he can call out other people on the right for being soft and compromised and captured. And mainstream conservatives know that their base is hungry for people who sound fearless. And Nick sounds fearless, while the main talking heads of conservatism sound very anxious and afraid. Right? So Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, Charlie Kirk, Glenn Beck, they push the idea that being conservative, being on the right, it's all about ideas and religion and patriotism. And Nick communicates an emotional logic, a narrative that speaks to those who are losing at life much more effectively. Right? Nick strips away the polite framing. So mainstream conservatisms fear Nick because Nick says the quiet part out loud without fear. And so Nick is forcing Conservatism Incorporated to confront what their own audience responds to. And Nick shows how thin these conservative institutions become. Right? Nick is a lone streamer with no organization who can pull in an enormous audience. Right? What does that say about the durability of the conservative movement? Right? People like Ben Shapiro, Charlie Kirk, Sean Hannity, Ron DeSantis, they needed the illusion of a coherent political coalition. Right? Nick Fuentes sheds their illusions by revealing how fluid and unanchored the right's young base is. Right? So Nick frightens Conservatism Incorporated, not because he's powerful, but because he reminds them that their power is brittle, that they are vulnerable. He is the stress test they never wanted. Right? No think tank, no super PAC, no seat in Congress. But Nick has weaponized the America First doctrine against its own creators. Right? He has trapped Conservatism Incorporated in a purity spiral that they cannot control.
Said, so I want to see more like that. I want to see you hit DeSantis.
Now, you listen to that, and there's zero possibility that Trump doesn't remember that. He sat across from dinner. Trump is a people person. He's a politician. He, of course, understands who Nick Fuentes is. He understood exactly what the context of that question was, and he refused to denounce Tucker for speaking to Nick Fuentes, and also, by extension, refused to denounce Nick Fuentes. Now, here is what happened with J.D. Vance. I think J.D. Vance understands at least as well as Trump, because J.D. Vance is infinitely more online than Trump or most politicians. J.D. Vance is the vice president of the United States and frequently will get into kind of back and forth arguments with people without much power in Washington on X. He goes to Blue Sky and trolls liberals. He's 2 generations younger than Trump. He's very connected to online discourse, very aware as somebody who wants to be president of what the right-wing discourse online is about Tucker, about Nick Fuentes, and he knows that people are waiting for him to weigh in because all this is about J.D. Vance. Trump's not running again. J.D. Vance is going to run. And you have liberals trying to leverage this against J.D. Vance because they're most afraid of him. And you have conservatives who are in the pro-Israel neocon wing who are suspicious of J.D. Vance and want to force him either to take a loyalty oath to Israel and to neoconservatism, or they want to start destroying him now. And so they are going to do everything to force him to weigh in. And he did weigh in, but not on the direct subject that is being discussed. He didn't weigh in on the question of whether the U.S. should continue to support Israel, whether Tucker Carlson should be repudiated for having interviewed Nick Fuentes without screaming and yelling Nazi in his face over and over. Instead, this is how J.D. Vance weighed in. He weighed in about 10 days ago by saying this, quote, "The infighting is stupid. I care about my fellow citizens, particularly young Americans, being able to afford a decent life. I care about immigration and our sovereignty. And I care about establishing peace overseas so our resources can be focused at home. If you care about those things too, let's work together." Now, obviously he's trying to play the leader, saying, look, let's not be infighting. But all of the language he used was very much coded in favor of the people who are saying, why are we sending our money to Israel? We should use our money here at home. The America First ideology, the one defended by Tucker Carlson. And there were a lot of people who heard that in the Republican establishment and reacted with a lot of anger, including the Wall Street editorial page.
So in an increasingly secular West, World War II has taken on a great narrative power. And so in a world of relativity, Nazis have become the one transcendent group, right? They are the quintessence of evil in popular culture. And there's a new Holocaust movie out. It's called Nuremberg. And it was shocking to me because there are no heroes in this movie. Right? You would think that there would be heroes in a movie about the Holocaust, but there are no heroes. And it has a frame on this story that's quite different from history. So after World War II, if you try to talk to someone about the Holocaust, people wouldn't have known what you were talking about. The Holocaust only developed as a concept of a particular group suffering in World War II in 1960s, and it only seized the popular imagination, starting with Eichmann's trial in Jerusalem in the early 60s, but really with the American ABC network series on the Holocaust around 1978. And so the notion that the quintessence of evil in the Second World War was the murder of Jews would have seemed quite strange for the first 15 years after World War II. So this movie, Nuremberg, focuses that the Holocaust was the crime of crimes, while the real Nuremberg trials were not primarily about the Holocaust. Right? This movie centers on a psychological portrayal of Hermann Goering, and Goering is the most compelling character in this film. He is the central figure around which everyone else revolves. So the true legal crime of crimes of the Nuremberg trials was crimes against peace or aggressive war. That was the law that was invented to put Nazis to death, that the Nazis had waged an aggressive war. And you still hear this type of language in news media coverage today, that Putin launched an illegal war against Ukraine. Well, you could do the same thing for the American invasion occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq. You could make a strong case that these were illegal wars. It just seems silly to me to frame wars on the basis of whether or not they are legal. So the Holocaust was not the focus of the Nuremberg trials. Right? The focus was a Bolshevik, Marxist, Leninist critique that World War II was started by capitalist imperialism as embodied by Nazi Germany. So the Soviets play very little role in this movie, but the Nuremberg trials were based on a Soviet view, a Leninist view, that what the Nazis did wrong was to wage aggressive wars because they were imperialist capitalists. So the film is all about whether the Nazis were mad or bad. But what was really going on in the Nuremberg trials was a conviction of Nazis as operating in the inevitable force of the capitalist imperialist structure that this struggle for resources for grain and oil and labor driven by capitalism pushed the Nazis to wage aggressive wars. Right? It's not that they were evil, they were radical capitalist imperialists trying to turn Eastern Europe into a colonial empire for economic exploitation. Right? This was the Marxist-Leninist logic behind the Nuremberg trial. So the Holocaust is treated as the horrific climax of Nazi racial ideology in this movie, but that wasn't the focus of the Nuremberg trials. So in the movie narrative, the primary focus is on the individual psychology and morality of the leading Nazis. What happened at Nuremberg was capitalism was put on trial. The supreme crime in this movie is the Holocaust. The supreme crime in the Nuremberg trials was aggressive war propelled by capitalism. The motivation for war in the movie is madness, hate, and ideology. In reality, at Nuremberg, it was the capitalist resource extraction and colonial expansion driven by capitalism that was the motivation for the war. So Soviets play almost no role in this movie, but they were the intellectual architects of the Nuremberg trials. So the key insight of the movie is that evil is banal and human, and there's nothing particular about the Nazis, that all people are vulnerable to acting evilly if pressed into desperate situations. And the key insight from the Nuremberg trials in legal parlance was the development of anti-imperialist theory that has dominated international law ever since. So that it was waged on behalf of the Vietnamese and then on behalf of the Palestinians, that oppressed people who have suffered from colonial Western imperialism essentially cannot be morally restrained, that anything that they do is okay, while anything done to constrain them must be strictly regulated. So when the Palestinians launch terror attacks on Israel, or when the Vietnamese would launch terror attacks in their war against the United States, anything that they wanted to do was understandable because they were fighting Western imperialism. And when the West tries to defend itself against these kind of terror attacks from this Soviet Leninist logic, it must be severely restricted, or from the human rights logic. And it was just, I was struck that there were no heroes in this movie. Right? It goes out of its way not to give you any heroes. It's not victors bring justice to the wicked. Right? It's a bleak film. It's a procedural film. It's a psychological film. It's a claustrophobic drama. The protagonists in it, the psychiatrist and the chief prosecutor, are all morally compromised. Right? Robert Jackson, the chief prosecutor, an American, is stern, he's troubled, he's burdened, and he is outfoxed by Goering. The movie refuses to paint him as righteous. He's competent, he's committed, but he's not shining. The emotional center of the movie is Hermann Goering. He's charismatic, he's manipulative, he's self-possessed, he dominates the screen. Right? The film is fascinated with Goering, not with the men prosecuting him. And the film treats the trial procedure as moral quicksand. Right? Nothing in the courtroom feels uplifting. Everything's procedural, constrained, compromised. Nobody comes out looking noble. There's no catharsis. Right? It's the opposite of the movie Judgment at Nuremberg. This film is a portrait of a process of flawed people. It's not a morality play.
The Wall Street Journal editorial page, ground zero, the epicenter of Republican establishment thought. Here was their headline: J.D. Vance, the Heritage Foundation, and the case for conservative, quote, infighting. So it's directly disputing J.D. Vance's decree that we shouldn't be infighting. And this is what they said, quote, Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes.
So I found the Nuremberg movie compelling. Right? I recommend it as a movie and as thought-provoking.
Promote noxious ideas that imperil the right. Quote, Mr. Vance's breezy dismissal of the struggle to extirpate extremists from the right-wing coalition as infighting is a mistake. What he belittles as intramural squabbling is the difficult and necessary work of moral and political hygiene for the conservative movement in the country. What we saw at Heritage last week wasn't some distraction from more important work. It was the latest episode in the struggle of good versus evil. Good being the people who want to keep sending money to Israel and fight wars for Israel. Evil being the people who are questioning it. The Free Press also understood where subtly and with some code, but nonetheless pretty clearly, J.D. Vance was trying to side. This is Bari Weiss's RAG, which is basically an arm of Israeli state media, and they ran the title J.D. Vance versus
The Free Press isn't an arm of Israeli state media. It is passionately pro-Zionist.
the Groypers, ? Quote, conservatives in Washington, D.C. have been saying to me that the influence of neo-Nazi Holocaust-denying live streamer Nick Fuentes has taken off among Gen Z congressional administration staffers. One older insider put the number of Fuentes fans and fellow travelers, so-called Groypers, in these Washington circles at, quote, 30 to 40%. I ran the 30-40% claim past the conservative Zoomers I spoke to in D.C. Every one of them affirmed it. Christian faith, they explained, has not inoculated young men against anti-Semitism. Vance is still figuring out how best to respond to Fuentes' supporters. The sharp criticism of the vice president after he failed to push back with sufficient force when the Groypers came after him recently at Ole Miss are not helping. He should be...
So Victor Davis Hanson says the fuddy-duddies are now on the left. And why would that be? Why is the right so much more flamboyant? Because the left has more responsibility. Most of our institutions are in the hands of the left. The more responsibility you have, the less freedom you have, the less room you have to be flamboyant, the more you have to follow the logic of a particular situation.
The squares. No, the squares are the left. They run all the institutions. All these fuddy-duddies that are spouting at you, that's like conservatives when I was, my generation, rebelled. The establishment in Europe, the United States, is left-wing. So the natural youthful rebelliousness is cool because you're attacking the establishment, and the establishment has to be left. That's why the left gets so freaked out. They think, well, we brought in granny glasses and long hair and, you know, trashing things and the F word, and all of a sudden we're conservative.
So Victor Davis Hanson's not just part of Conservatism Incorporated. He's also a little edgier, a little more nationalist.
And these little nerdy young people want to get married and have kids. That's radical. That's what Charlie Kirk, before he was killed, was trying to talk about. I talked to him a long time when I was in 2 weeks before he died on a video, but I...
And the chat's talking about Jewish supremacism. I would think that anyone with a strong in-group identity is a supremacist. I would think a normal Christian who believes that Christianity is true is a Christian supremacist. If you are a patriotic nationalist American, I would think that you are an American supremacist, right? I would think that everyone with a passionate in-group identity is a supremacist of their group.
Talked to him before when I visited there. That was what people failed to comprehend. That was one thing. The second great thing,
yes, that's one reason why Charlie Kirk didn't receive more respectful treatment in the mainstream media, is that he never graduated from college.
Told us is that you can be a lot smarter by not going to college. So he had only gone, what?
Who follows the ideology of Jewish supremacist Curtis Yarvin. I don't think Curtis Yarvin's a Jewish supremacist. I find him incredibly trite. I find him banal. I find him unbearable. I find him a waste of time.
Well, dropped out. He never got a degree, never was in college more than a semester or two. He goes to the Oxford Union, supposedly the most sophisticated debaters, and he kind of wipes the floor with that guy. But anyway, that there is a youthful rebellion against the static European economy, which is controlled, regulated, socialist. And
all right, so why is the right so much more flamboyant, and why is the left so square and fuddy-duddy? Because the left runs our institutions, they have more responsibility, so they have less freedom. Populism's often popular, it's really good at governing. Now, the right runs the three major branches of the federal government, and so now it has institutional power. Usually you would expect it to stop kicking the furniture. Right? The left has dominated our institutions for decades. Once you sit in power, you inherit the guardrails, right? You have to think about budgets, employees, reputations, norms. You worry about lawsuits. You worry about HR. You think twice before speaking, right? So the right has not had that burden, right? It's largely operated outside our major institutions. So it cultivated this countercultural vibe. It was free to be theatrical and flamboyant and to punch up and to mock the establishment because it wasn't running anything. So much easier to mock things when you're not running anything. So right-wing influencers sound like insurgents because there's no cost to being provocative when you're not running anything. So now the right controls the White House, Congress, Supreme Court. It inherits responsibility. That forces a tone change because governing is slow, it's procedural, it's full of trade-offs, it exposes you to scrutiny and accountability, it pushes that flamboyance into a collision with reality, right? You can't scream about burning down the deep state when you are the deep state. So the right's populist energy is harder to sustain now because governance requires compromise. Right? Populism thrives on simplicity and emotional clarity. Governance thrives on complexity and coalition building. The two rarely coexist comfortably. Populist movements usually fall apart when they taste real power. So these divisions in MAGA are not unusual in a populist movement that seizes power. You have all these purity tests, and those in power cannot afford to be as pure as those who have no responsibility. So you have these populist influences turning on Republican politicians, the base feels betrayed, the machinery bogs down, and now the left is rediscovering its countercultural voice. Right? The left is getting its swagger back. The left is on the attack. The left now sounds younger, fresher, looser. So we have a volatile moment. Power ages you. You become the adult in the room when you have power. And the people you used to rage against, right, they now may exist outside the centers of power, and they get to perform, and you have to be the responsible one.
Less indulgent of the podcast host and the two online right. But remember, Tucker was an early supporter of Vance and they developed a close friendship. But at a certain point, this virtue becomes a vice. Vance must be careful. A warning to J.D. Vance, you better be careful when you talk about Israel and Tucker and all of this happening.
The bad people are everywhere, which is both obviously the bad news and
So I don't find that a useful frame of dividing people into good and bad. I recognize that it provides emotional clarity. It feels good. I think it's more useful to understand that in different situations, different groups have different interests.
also the good news. Because what it means is that the choice is not between which side you're caucusing with. It's between, are you caucusing with the people that believe in the American project or not?
Right. And so the talk is the people who believe in the American project, but what she's really talking about, people who are committed to Zionism. And so this dishonesty will rub, I think, a number of people the wrong way.
It's not a coincidence that the people that are both trafficking in and koshering anti-Semitism are doing that alongside the trafficking and koshering of anti-Americanism. That is the choice right now. It's between people in this country who have given up on the idea of...
It's just not true, right? The more devoted you are to America, the less devoted you'll be to foreign states. The more devoted you are to a foreign state, the less likely you are to be devoted to America. Now, in the United States, those Jews who are most Zionists are the most likely to vote Republican and to be the most American nationalist as well.
Of the American project and turn their back on it. And you see it in the way they're revising our heroes and our history and the heroes in history of Western civilization more broadly, Churchill being the obvious emblem of that, and the people who still believe in that. And the great news is that that's still the majority of Americans.
So went and asked ChatGPT, what distinguishes the West? You hear a lot of talk about Western civilization, like what the hell is it? And perhaps the best answer is Western civilization is a politically correct term for Christianity, for Christendom. The West is the politically correct term for Christendom. Now, what are the valued components of the West that people like Bari, Weiss support? Reason and argument. The West built a culture where disagreement is a virtue. In Greece, we had normalized public debate. In the Hebrew tradition, we had prophets who would rail against existing institutions. Rome built enormous legal structures. Medieval universities turned disputation into a craft. So you get societies that treat argument as a path to truth. Source criticism. So the West hardwired skepticism into its intellectual institutions. You have biblical criticism, scientific criticism, journalism, peer review, courts that treat facts as something that you have to prove. So we have a culture in the West where people expect claims to be able to stand up against scrutiny instead of just resting on authority. Individual agency, the West elevated the individual as the primary moral unit. Universal frameworks, so Christianity, Roman law, the Enlightenment taught Westerners to think in rules that apply to everyone. Restless innovation, the West has become hooked on improvement from medieval mills to industrial capitalism to modern science largely comes from the West. And there's a whole school in the academy that has risen to more and more influence over the past 30 years, and that's social construction, that everything's not everything, but many things that we think as innate are socially constructed. But the awkward thing about social construction, as Steve Sailer points out, is that the most important developments in social construction were done by people of European heritage. So social construction is the good way to look at the world, but the most important effects of social construction, the most important developments in social construction have been done by Europeans. Moral universalism, right? The West develops a habit of treating moral questions as global. The tragic sense, Western thought carries a large streak of self-doubt. Culture of schism, the West fragments. It produces reformations, counter-reformations, revolutions, sects, heresies. So there's a few of the characteristics of the Western civilization.
At least what I believe, and we'll get to that a little maybe when we talk about CBS. The other way to maybe articulate it is it's a choice between the politics of resentment, which gets you to anti-Semitism almost as the next step, and a politics of individual responsibility. And the politics of resentment...
Wait, this whole video is a politics of resentment. You can't help but have a politics of resentment. We all can't help but operate with resentment. It's just that there are adaptive, optimal levels of resentment, and then there are excess levels of resentment that will push you to operate against your best interests. Resentment is not ipso facto a bad thing. It's just part of being human. It's like lust. It's a fire. It's power.
Do not have, the right and the left do not have exclusivity to that. And that's what you're seeing right now. And so it should be no surprise that in a moment of finger pointing and looking for the scapegoat who has left housing unaffordable or has left you, in a city or in a town that has suffered from fentanyl addiction or deindustrialization, all these pathologies that are real and true, that people are looking to point the finger, and they point the finger at the Jewish people.
Right. Dana, I want to ask you to comment on that, but there's another thing that I want to know from you in particular. As I as a casual observer, when I look at someone like Tucker's numbers on YouTube, you see, he'll have an episode on healthcare policy, and his numbers are here, and then a number about how Ashkenazi Jews actually can't get COVID, and his numbers are way up here. And it makes you wonder if actually anti-Semitism as a business model,
it's a great one,
has a kind of market, and it is a market driver in media.
Yeah, I think it does. It's just not clear yet how it translates into electoral.
Anti-Semitism isn't automatically a driver. A visceral story is a driver, and sometimes a visceral story will be anti-Semitic.
Oral politics and how it translates into policy. So I agree with Bari that what we've learned is there are bad people everywhere. But what we've also learned that on one side of this debate, those views...
It's completely understandable why any intensely identifying in-group would regard its enemies as inherently bad people. But I think a more thoughtful way to navigate life is to recognize different people have different interests. Don't just divide people up into good guys and bad guys, depending on how they ally with your group.
Views are now the mainstream. And on the other side of the debate, it's the jury's still out. So on the right, there are bad people. It's not clear yet whether, we hope, thankfully, Ben's heroic work these last couple of weeks, hopefully there will be a lot of pushback so those views don't become the mainstream. But we know that on the left, they are the mainstream, okay? So just start with the right. This whole debate over the last few weeks has kind of forgotten that Donald Trump is still president of the United States. And oh, by the way, he's going to be president of the United States for over 3 more years. And despite all the stuff online that we're freaking out about, he has not apologized once or pulled back from perhaps the most muscular foreign policy and most pro-Israel foreign policy of our lifetime. Neither have Republican members of Congress. So again, you ask a Republican member of Congress these days, most of them are not worried about their prospects in a general election. Most of them live in fear of a primary challenge from the right. Most of them are in pretty safe red districts. And yet not a single one has come to the defense of Tucker Carlson or Nick Fuentes, except 2, Tom Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who just lost her endorsement for re-election from Donald Trump. That's it. Speaker Johnson came out with a strong statement. Leaders like Ted Cruz have come out with strong statements. Even elected foot soldiers in the MAGA movement like Josh Hawley came out with strong statements. If you look at the institutions that are blowing up in the last couple of weeks, it's the Heritage Foundation that's blowing up. It's not actually the institution.
It's hard to call Ben's attacks on Tucker heroic because Ben's not risking anything. Ben's not sacrificing anything. Ben is just doing the same type of things that he does. I largely aligned with Ben. I'm Zionist, I'm Republican, I'm like free markets for free people and all that stuff. But it's hard to call his attacks on Tucker heroic. Right? When you don't risk anything, you don't sacrifice anything, when you only get applause from your in-group, how is that heroic?
That we care about and that we're identified with. So I think the left has spoken, right? Mamdaniism, and when I think back to Obama's speech in 2004 to Democrats.
Being on the left means that you don't think that tribalism and ethnic and racial identity should be the primary organizing principle for a state. So it's not like the left just uniquely hates Israel, right? Being on the left means that you're not a big fan of ethno-nationalism, whether Jewish ethno-nationalism or other forms of ethno-nationalism, right? It's simply a different way of looking at the world. It comes with some adaptive advantages and some maladaptive detriments.
Democratic Convention. Which, if you think about that speech, it launched basically close to 2 decades of Obama defining the left and Democratic politics, all right? That was like a project for a couple decades. I think we are at the beginning of Mamdaniism as a national project. I think the Democratic Party is looking to Mamdani now as like the next, not that he can run, but just the idea that what he represents is where the Democratic Party is going, or where the left is going. Talk about a time for choosing. Like it is.
Right, you listen to Bari Weiss and you hear her condemn the politics of resentment. But the politics of resentment is what's driving this entire video. She attributes the politics of resentment to the anti-Semites and the anti-American crowd. Well, the same politics drives every crowd. Strong in-group identity always goes with a strong sense of grievance and victimhood. Right? The entire emotional engine of the Zionist crowd here is grievance, and that's fine with me. I'm Zionist. I have my grievances too, but don't pretend that you're not on the side of the politics of resentment. Right? The video is all about how Jews and the pro-American patriots are being betrayed by universities' left-wing elites and a younger generation drawn into nihilism. All right? These are grievance narratives. So you have these people trying to do a balancing act. We're not whining, we're not pleading, we're not complaining. But the content is essentially, our people are under serious threat from anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, and institutional capture, right? They reject victimhood as a posture, but they lean hard on victimhood as diagnosis and story. So for the Groyper world and the Fuentes world, and for white people, white racial identity or Christian nationalism or any sort of grievance on the part of non-Jewish young white men who are Christian, that's bad, right? This is reactive, nihilistic, unserious, right? This is being a basement-dwelling, ridiculous loser, right? But on the Jewish institutional world, on this stage, right, patriotic American, Zionist, proud Jew, believer in meritocracy, Judeo-Christian, right? These are the virtues, and you get a victim story, right? The perennial scapegoat of the politics resentment, attacked from both the left and the right, misrepresented by the media, undermined by the universities they built, threatened by rising anti-Semitism and anti-Israel politics, right? Their particular victim story, we're supposed to believe, is noble and realistic, justifies philanthropy, institution building, media projects, and a muscular Jewish American identity. But your in-group story, right, your sense of victimhood, your sense of grievance, that just makes you a loser, right? When Jews realize they're under attack and then they channel that into organization and activism, that's good. But when say, white young Christian men feel we're under attack and they channel that into activism, then that just shows you're a loser.
Is so clear. If that's their mainstream, then they have chosen. Our mainstream yet, what is mainstream on our side, has not chosen. We've got a lot of work to do, but I'm worried, but I'm not alarmed.
You're not alarmed?
I'm not alarmed because I am struck that every leader that is under this, under pressure from this online mob.
So white Christian victim narrative, that's exaggerated, that's coddling, that's a cop-out, that's only for losers. Jewish victim narrative, that's grounded in history. That's a sober description of reality. It's a necessary spur to courage and responsibility.
Is still standing strong. Who has fallen? No one has fallen. I'm not saying.
But what does it mean that the Vice President of the United States had Tucker Carlson on his show when he hosted Charlie Kirk's show? What does that mean?
I am patiently waiting for the Vice President to come out like a number of other leaders have come out in recent weeks.
I do think that there's comfort to be had in the fact that elected leaders have acted in such a patriotic American way, rejecting the politics of scapegoating. That is something that should give us some hope. But I think that the thing that, at least as I read Rod's haunting reporting, that he points us to is a danger among the young. Ben, you have been able to speak into the lives of young men in America as well as anybody. Tell us.
So what would someone who's neutral on Jews, how would a normal American react to this video, right? They'd be bewildered. Why is everything about anti-Semitism? Right? If they know Jews, they recognize that the Jews overall occupy a privileged position in the United States, right? A normal person would think, why do these people see anti-Semitism everywhere, right? Are these really the biggest threats, right? It would feel incredibly tribal and insular and racial, right? The panel keeps returning to Jewish victimhood, Jewish grievance, Jewish anxiety, no matter the question. Right? The whole event is in a different language than what a normal American would be familiar with. It's all about Zionism, Jewish philanthropy, Jewish day schools, Israel's military. Right? A normal American would have no intuitive feel for this ecosystem, would feel like watching a competent conversation from a world they don't live in. They'd notice that Ben Shapiro is really harsh on the Groper kids, but soft on his own tribe. Right? They'd notice that he mocks white Christian guys for victimhood, but then spends the rest of the panel describing Jews as besieged, misunderstood, misreported, scapegoated, isolated, endangered. Right? A normal viewer doesn't have to side with Nick Fuentes to feel the asymmetry. They think he's letting his own group's fears count as reality. He dismisses other groups' fears as excuses. A neutral viewer would think that Bari Weiss is smart and ambitious, but she would feel like her mission feels self-appointed. She feels like she's taking stewardship of CBS News in favor of a foreign state. A regular American watching this video would think, it's kind of weird how much they talk about America when their real concern is Jews. Right? Every big American category is recast through a Jewish lens. American decline, threat to Jews, American youth, danger for Jews, American politics, anti-Semitism rising, American foreign policy, Israel central, American civic renewal comes through Jewish schools and Zionism. This is how all tight-knit groups talk amongst themselves, but to an outsider, feels like they're mapping their tribe's internal anxieties onto national politics, and they're treating it as universal. And the villain list feels incredibly tribal. They would notice how quickly the conversation sorts everyone into good, meaning Zionists, Jews, Israel, normie conservatives, the responsible elites, the 75%, bad, Nick Fuentes, Tucker, Andrew Tate, the Squad, the Woke, Zora Mandani, the universities, TikTok, Europeans, third worldism, anti-meritocracy. Right? They would think this is not a neutral civic discussion. This is a group defending its interests in America. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not presented this way. Right? Or the praise of Israel. Right? If you're not Jewish, not particularly concerned with Israel, it would seem a bit weird. The philanthropic concerns are exclusively internal. Right? This has nothing to do with America at large. This is about tribal preservation. Right? This feels like a board meeting, not a public debate. Right? An outside viewer sees wealthy donors, elite journalists, top right-wing influencers, institutional leaders, a moderator who shares all the same assumptions. Right? It would come across as an internal family meeting. So a non-Jewish American without strong opinions on Jews or Israel would walk away thinking these are smart, articulate people. They have real concerns about their own tribe. They're very invested in their own tribe. They see anti-Semitism as the root explanation for everything. They moralize about their group's vulnerability, but they scored everyone else. The entire conversation is Jewish-centered, but pretends to be about America. This is a high-status elite subculture defending its tribal interests. This is not some kind of neutral analysis of America, right? Interesting people speaking from inside their own bubble. This isn't about America. This is about themselves, which is fine.
I mean, you started to tell us the attraction that they have to this nihilism, but tell us what we should understand, not about, thank God we have Speaker Johnson. What about the 20-year-olds who are trying to find their way in this movement and in this country?
So, I mean, I think
Thank God we have Speaker Johnson. Thank God we have our institutions. Thank God we have the President Donald Trump. Thank God we have so much power and influence.
there are a few factors that are playing into this. One of them I discussed already, which is sort of this reactionary backlash to a feeling that if you grew up under, Barack Obama-ism and followed by Mamdani-ism, you're reacting to that and you react in the most nihilistic possible way. The other truth is that one of the things that distinguishes President Trump from other members of his administration, shall we say, is that President Trump is not too online. He's actually very not online. He doesn't actually follow what's going on in X at all. He will get literal printouts of mainstream media outlets, right? People will print out actual online outlets like the Free Press, and they will put it in front of him in order for him to read it, right? So that because of that, he is disconnected.
So was it a couple of weeks ago, 6 Democratic politicians put out a video saying that if you're in the U.S. military, you don't have to follow illegal orders. Let me play some.
I'm Senator Alyssa Slotkin.
Senator Mark Kelly. Representative Chris DeLuzio.
Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander.
Representative Chrissy Houlihan.
Congressman Jason Crow. I was a captain in the United States Navy.
Former CIA officer.
Former Navy. Former paratrooper and Army Ranger.
Former intelligence officer.
Former Air Force.
We want to speak directly to members of the military
and the intelligence community
who take risks each day to keep Americans safe.
We know you are under enormous stress and pressure right now.
Americans trust their military.
But that trust is at risk. This administration is pitting our uniformed military
and intelligence community professionals
against American citizens. Like us, you all swore an oath
to protect and defend this Constitution.
Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
No one has to carry out orders that violate the law
or our Constitution.
We know this is hard and that it's a difficult time to be a public servant.
But whether you're serving in the CIA,
the Army, or Navy,
the Air Force,
your vigilance is critical.
And know that we have your back.
Because now, more than ever,
the American people need you.
We need you to stand up for our laws,
our Constitution, and who we are as Americans. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up.
Don't give up the ship.
So Mark Halperin has said, why the hubbub about this video? They're just telling people not to follow illegal orders. And this is a trait that I notice in elite discussions and in the mainstream media all the time. So they have a preference for taking everything literally. So on the denotative, the literal meaning of what they're saying, there's nothing objectionable. They're saying don't follow illegal orders. But words don't just occur in a vacuum. They occur in a context. And the context for this is that they are encouraging disobedience to the Trump administration. And from a Republican perspective, it feels like they're pushing sedition. So you'd understand why people who aren't on board with these Democratic politicians would be concerned.
The FBI is now seeking interviews with the Democratic lawmakers who said to the military, if there is an illegal order, don't follow it. Aren't folks in the military not supposed to follow illegal orders?
So this is an issue where obviously you're going to have two groups of people that see this completely differently. I mean, when I saw that video, I was outraged for the president because it's obvious what the Democrats were trying to do. They were trying to create a narrative that the president had, in fact, given illegal orders. Nobody's yet named an illegal order. All the people in the video went on TV and got asked, what are the illegal orders? None of them can name an illegal order. Alyssa Slotkin, who's supposed to be the moderate and the smart person in that group, said, well, we have this movie, A Few Good Men. I mean, it was so unserious, but the point was clear. They're trying to program their political party, half the country, into believing that the president has given an illegal order, which has not happened. And so he's outraged. Every Republican that I know is outraged. The legalities of this, the investigatory part of this, I'm less sure about. But I'll tell you this, it's not good to treat the military like pawns. These Democrats shut down the government 43 days and didn't pay them, and now they're out here using them in this illegal order video, which is obviously political. I think some people, in our coalition are thinking they keep treating the military like pawns. It's very disrespectful to treat the military this way.
Did you put this video out? I know you're trying to poke at him. Of course you don't obey an illegal order. Of course there are standards and processes that our military has followed, not just for decades, but for centuries. That's a given. You're doing this just to create a political issue. And shame on you, because there are men and women who are serving in Japan, in Korea, all over the globe, in the Middle East, in other Asian countries. And this is Thanksgiving. And they're not home. And they're sacrificing for this country. And you're playing politics at this point? My first reaction was, why the hell did you put this video out?
Right, so the literal denotative meaning of the video is no big deal, but words don't just fall in a vacuum, right? The connotative meaning was a hand grenade, right? It felt like an instigation to resist the direction of the president. So connotation beats denotation when trust is low, and the connotative meaning is what Republicans heard. The denotative meaning is probably what people on the left heard. And Mark Halperin admits he underestimated the depth of the reaction, right? He assumed that people were putting on their outrage. They weren't, right? It would be normal if you are on the right to feel provoked at a pre-rational level. And I didn't get why Halperin didn't get it. But he just didn't get it. So you see this all the time in the news media, that the MSN tends to take people's words literally, denotatively, and when they don't, usually it reveals their bias. So mainstream media focuses on being the sober interpreter of literal meaning, but it will toggle between denotative, the literal meaning, and connotative, the meaning within a particular context, depending on who is speaking and what story it wants to tell. So it will clean up quotes to make them sound more impressive for a person on the left, but they won't clean up quotes to make someone sound more impressive for somebody on the right. So if the media is sympathetic to someone, they will grant their words the most literal or the most charitable reading possible. If it advantages them, they will treat the language like a legal contract or focus on what was said, not what is implied. And so Republican outrage over refuse illegal orders gets treated as unserious because the literal meaning is unobjectionable. When activists chant dramatic slogans, right, the media urges the audience to separate the rhetoric from intent, right? Defund the police doesn't mean defund the police. From the river to the sea, it's all very complicated and contextual. If you read the whole transcript, that line isn't as bad as it sounds. So literalism becomes a shield. When it's useful, connotation gets flattened, right? Intent is assumed to be noble if it's coming from the good people. When the speaker is someone that the media distrusts or considers dangerous, then suddenly the media pivots to connotation. Everything becomes subtext. Everything becomes coded. Everything becomes a threat. So Trump tends to get read connotatively every time. A stray exaggeration becomes a plan. A half joke becomes a doctrine. A sloppy metaphor becomes a blueprint for fascism. Even when the denotative meaning is trivial, the connotative meaning will be inflated into a headline. So if Trump says, fight like hell, that's incitement. Take our country back, that means white identity politics. Right? Drain the swamp, that means fascist purging. So when the media trust speakers, that they only mean what they literally say, then they just give them their audience the literal meaning. So the media trusts some people, it doesn't trust others. So the press makes judgments, and then it decides what register to use. So trusted speakers, read them literally, unless you need to read them connotatively. So this is corrosive to trust, right? People feel gaslit when only one side's connotations are taken seriously, and only one side's denotations are taken seriously, right? People start watching not just the facts, but the interpretive frame. People start to realize that meaning is now adjudicated by a tribe, not by the text. Right? The literal meaning of this video was entirely defensible. The connotative meaning was provocative. And the press insists, oh, we're just following the literal words of what these people said.
And on the Republican Party, which is almost to the point where it's just useless, and I'm going to have to oppose it because I hate them too much, but because they're such betrayers. But anyway, in the Republican Party, it's like, you a socialist? Are you from Mondani? No, not really a socialist. Just, I don't want any more dollar stores. I don't want high density housing in my neighborhood. I don't want any more fucking strip malls that nobody goes to. No more karate studios and vape shops. Like, how about no? Ooh, socialist? You don't believe in the free market? Because you bribed a fucking county commissioner to build more garbage? You don't even live here? Mm-hmm. In a normal society, we'd like burn your strip mall down. You can't do that here. You can't turn my women into prostitutes. Sorry, OnlyFans. And you can't destroy the landscape that I live in. No. How about no? That's not crazy, is it?
No, it's not. I mean, no.
And you can't take all my tax dollars and then refuse to do anything about child molestation. Like, the whole reason you exist, county commissioners, is to protect my daughters from getting molested. But you won't because, like, why?
So Richard Ananya has this interpretation. Tucker just wants to shut down all businesses if he doesn't like how they look. Socialists at least feel compelled to give reasons for their positions, even if wrong. This is just stream of consciousness bile. I don't think it was stream of consciousness bile. That was a message that I felt it connect, and I'm sure for millions of people that type of message would connect. Tucker was not speaking there about a political platform. He wasn't speaking about policy. He was speaking about a narrative. He was speaking about how he experiences life. So Steve Saylor reveals that he got cataracts. I didn't realize that he got cataracts, but now he apparently he sees fine for the first time in 60 years. So B&H has insanely good customer service. It's like the Chick-fil-A of the photography world. So normally Hasidic Jews running camera companies out of New York City are not known for their great customer service, but B&H apparently is an exception. In the PISA database of leading countries, developed countries, migrants and the children of migrants score worse on average than natives in all first world countries, except for Australia and Canada, which have a selective immigration system where they only want to bring in those who are more likely to contribute to the country. So you often hear the talking point that migrants score better on tests than natives. Well, it's not true except in Australia and in Canada. Nathan Kaufner says, in 2013, the Heritage Foundation fired Jason Richwine because his PhD, granted from Harvard University, talked about group differences. And Nathan notes, it was easier for me to be hired by Cambridge than to get a foot in the door at any conservative think tank. But when it comes to Nick Fuentes and Tucker Carlson, we will always defend truth. The right could have beaten the left with science. Those were unacceptable terms for conservatives. In their heart, they are medieval peasants who recoil at science as if it were witchcraft. Then here is Dave Smith talking with Coleman Hughes.
We also have a four-star general who's on record saying that he saw these plans, that they were going to go overthrow all of these governments. But why is it then that I got four-star General Wesley Clark, Supreme Commander of the NATO forces? Why is it that he told me that he saw the plans? We know this because the four-star General Wesley Clark himself said that he was out of power at the time, but he went to the Pentagon and he said that he saw plans. How come I have four-star General Wesley Clark telling me 10 years prior that we had already made the plan? This has been confirmed by four-star General Wesley Clark that we were going to topple 7 countries in 5 years. Wesley Clark is a four-star general. He was the head of NATO, and he told Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! That he saw in late 2001 what is become known as the 7 wars in 5 years, that the plan from the neocons in the government was that we were going to overthrow all these governments in the region in the next 5 years.
Let's talk about this Wesley Clark memo that he never saw. Okay, so four-star General Wesley Clark.
He never saw it?
Yeah, he says so in the C-SPAN interview. You don't remember this? He's talking about it. He says that this guy.
He said, I just got this down from upstairs, meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, this is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. I said, is it classified? He said, yes, sir. I said, well, don't show it to me.
Rumsfeld, whose sometimes abrasive approach often alienated other cabinet members, produced 20 to 60 snowflakes, these memos, snowflakes a day, 20 to 60 a day. Regularly poured out his thoughts in writing as the basis for developing policy. Every once in a while, one of these ranting Rumsfeld notes to Condi would come. You can almost hear the eye roll. Like, this dude Rumsfeld is drowning us in his little thoughts and his stupid memos. Do you have any evidence that this memo was actually important as opposed to one snowflake in a shifting strategy of 60,000?
The fact is that much of what he said came true, and that's what makes it interesting.
That's how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years.
And that this was part of a strategy to overthrow 7 governments in 5 years. And all of them except one have been done. It's literally, he names 7 countries, and there's 1 to go. And that one, by the way, happens to be the one that Donald Trump is flirting with a war with right now, Iran. All the rest of them have happened.
Starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
3 of the countries out of 7, almost half the countries have not done regime change, let alone within 5 years, let alone in the specific order prescribed by the memo. And not to mention, we did do regime change in countries not on the memo at all, like Liberia. So there's actually no variable from the memo that actually matches our foreign policy. And
Coleman, my argument here isn't that, again, I'm not saying that memo came to life and exactly what was written down on that has happened. Of course, there were more memos. Of course, there were more decisions that were added in afterward. I'm saying that a 4-star general said the decision had been made, that he had sources in the Defense Department. His sources in the Defense Department.
Who is basing it on what? The memo.
There might be lots of memos that go out every day, but a memo that says we're going to topple 7 countries in the next 5 years, a pretty big memo. That's not just one of the regular memos. That's the point.
Do you have any evidence it was a big memo? Your only evidence is the guy who never read it. You realize how ridiculous this is. You couldn't, if you were a historian writing a book, you'd have to cut this out of the book because you're relying on the hearsay of someone that never even read the document, much less you or I have never read the document. And we know that they were writing 60 documents a day that Condoleezza Rice was putting in the trash. It's a ridiculously low bar of evidence you'd have to consider this memo and everything implied by it important.
I mean, I don't know how else to say this, dude. This just feels so nutty to me. I guess we'll just leave this up to people. Okay. And I'm not a historian writing a book. I'm a guy talking about these issues to the American people. So I don't know. You can decide whether you find that to be a pretty interesting story or not.
Kofner says, a comic goes on the biggest platforms in the U.S., bobbing his head, spewing a conspiracy theory. Turns out it's based on misremembered information and factual errors. When called out, I'm not a historian writing a book. I'm a guy talking about these issues. And there's a post on X. I hope Israel and its supporters realize no matter how many weirdos they pay to spread their nonsense, they will never erase this image from our brain. And the image is of a devastated Gaza city. Kofner says, that's the whole point. First time in 2,000 years, there are now consequences to killing Jews. With this image in their brains, people might think twice before they try to do it again. So the primary thing that keeps people from launching attacks like October 7, 2023 is the danger of this type of retaliation. Right? No country can afford to keep up enough armed forces on their borders to protect against this kind of insane attack. The main deterrence is what will happen if you attack someone.
Of rent-controlled properties are being lived in by people who weren't even born in the country? What kind of system is this? We bring in people from foreign countries, and then we pay to lower the cost of their housing, while people who were born here have to pay higher prices. 40%?
That's a pretty good point. Stephen tweets, this is the great lie of mass migration. You're not just importing individuals, you're importing societies. No magic transformation occurs when a failed state crosses borders. At scale, migrants and their descendants recreate the conditions, terrors of their broken homelands. Some truth there, but Richard Hanania, I'll give him credit, he did have a good response. He says, look at this city on the southern Texas border with a comparatively low murder rate, and just across the border in Mexico, there is a city with just an astronomical murder rate. Also, so people don't just have one essence, and they then demonstrate that one essence wherever they go. Right? People are profoundly affected by a situation.
Connected from the insanity of the algorithmic nuttiness that's happening on, for example, X or TikTok. But that's not true for young people. Young people are immersed in this. They are immersed in it hours and hours a day. And so it's pretty easy to fake them into believing that when they are doing trolling memery about Hitler, that it has no real world effect and that it's not affecting their brain in any real way, that it's just a joke until it isn't actually a joke anymore. And it turns out that you're holding a lot of those beliefs. And so, that online ecosystem is where a lot of this stuff is happening. I also think that, again, it's true that young people have been disserved by a political class that lies to them. And maybe this is just the nature of politics, which is that politicians have a stake in telling you that you have unsolvable problems that only they can solve if you give them enough power. But the problem is, if you say that to young men and you remove the agency from them, they get angry and they don't know what to do with that anger. They don't know where to go. What young men really want, right? I mean, having been one at one time, what young men really want to do is actually go build things. They actually want to go out and forge into the world and be useful.
So I have to give Richard Hanania credit for this particular tweet. It says, there's a city on the U.S. side of the Rio Grande called El Paso. It has a murder rate of 3 per 100,000. It's one of the safest big cities in the U.S. On the other side is Juarez, with the same demographic, where the murder rate is 71 per 100,000 and is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. So the idea that immigrants just always recreate their home societies here is not true. It is somewhat true in some circumstances, more true in others, less true in other circumstances.
Oddity, that coincidence, in terms of Bari Weiss's prescription for how to save corporate media in general, CBS in particular, and just American discourse on the whole. But then the funniest part is the example that Bari Weiss gave for how we can revitalize interest in corporate media outlets that are dying, like CBS News, is she said, we have to get really charismatic people who can debate the issues of the day in a way that is very civil. They end up being friends after they're debating, but they're really charismatic, and the debates they're having are the kinds of debates that Americans want to hear in this very responsible and representative way of 75% of the audience, of the public. And the two people she has said as her example are the kind of people that need to be re-included into corporate media discourse as a way of being so charismatic that they represent the vast majority of the great middle, is Alan Dershowitz and Dana Leitch. Now, Alan Dershowitz, of course, is a lifelong Israel fanatic. He's, I think, 84 years old. I don't really think he's the person that a lot of younger people who have stopped watching corporate media feel they're craving for as a charismatic figure, to be able to watch CBS News in order to hear from again. And then Dana Leitch, I think I'm pronouncing her name wrong, and if so, I apologize. It's really not intentional. I think the reason is that she was a very big deal, like very relevant for about 6 seconds during the Obama administration. She became this new face of the NRA. She's very pretty. She walked around with all these guns all the time, attracted.
I'm not some huge Glenn Greenwald fan, but he's been saying interesting and often important things for more than 20 years. Right? He has a distinguished track record of being on top of some important stories.
A lot of attention. I really haven't heard about her or from her or thought about her for a decade. The reason she's on Bari Weiss's mind is because last week, as part of this whole intra-MAGA debate over whether Tucker Carlson should have interviewed Nick Fuentes, she came out and gave this stirring speech about the importance of eliminating from right-wing and conservative politics anyone who doesn't support the state of Israel, condemning Tucker for interviewing Nick Fuentes. She interviewed some person who was a critic of Israel in a very aggressive way, saying conservative politics. That's the only reason Bari Weiss has any interest in her. So the idea that
these are good points by Glenn Greenwald, Israel skeptic, right? When Israel skeptic makes good points, you have to say, hey, this Israel skeptic made good points. Decoding the Gurus is hosted by a couple of center-left academics, and they did a fun show on Stefan Molyneux. Stefan Molyneux, part one, a fun guy who was here to help.
the element that you're noting.
So if you genuinely
So this decoding is part of their cult season.
believe, if you are certain that the initiation of the use of force is immoral, and that those in your life, not in the news, those in your life who advocate and praise you getting shot, what are you going to do with those people? If you're certain, what are you going to do with those people?
Yes, all governance and all law in the final analysis has to be backed by the use of force. But Stefan Molyneux is trying to program people to cut ties with anyone who's for a bigger form of government than he is.
You know the answer. It's nothing I need to tell you.
You have to defoo.
You don't keep people, and it's amazing to even have to say this. But let me say it. So there's no misunderstanding. It's nothing you don't know. You don't keep people in your life who want you shot. You don't hang with people who want you shot. You don't go to dinner parties with people who want you shot. Do you understand? What about you means, what against me in terms of violence really means. You don't go to Thanksgiving dinner with people who want you thrown in jail. You don't.
Remember, he's talking here about anyone who's not for a libertarian type of government. So he's promoting cutting ties with the vast majority of people.
Go on little shopping excursions with a mother who wants you shot. If you do, and
once you shot means someone who is okay with higher tax rates and more government intervention than you are.
I mean, you can do whatever you want. But just now so you understand with real clarity. Real clarity.
And remember, Stefan bills his community as the largest philosophical community on the internet. Right? This is highbrow philosophy.
That if you sit down with somebody, look them in the eye and say, you support the use of violence against me? And that person says, yep. And then you say, great, let's go play some air hockey, right? Then you're a coward.
Is that subtle?
It is not subtle. Of course, listeners will know that a standard practice of cults is to separate people. Well, first of all, get them on board with a very totalizing philosophy spouted by the
binary. Yes, no, they want you dead, or they agree entirely with your insane anarcho-capitalist rhetoric.
Exactly. It's only a Sith deals in absolutes. Never was better advice given in a movie. But yeah, that is what they do, and they separate you from your family and your friends and all your social networks. Anyone really, on the grounds that the other people have not accepted the absolute truth. Yeah, Chris, I'm really seeing the benefit actually of us doing this cult season, because I think it is helpful to listen to these cultish figures like Keith Raniere, Stefan Molyneux back to back, and you hear the kinds of things they're saying. I mean, he is like a less sophisticated, less plausible cult leader than Keith Raniere, and I think that's why he was, but he probably had less success, I think, but also didn't go to jail.
Yeah, that's part of the issue, right? He's still around. He's Matt. A point here that I feel that's worth noting is these clips are quite old, right? They're from back in the day in the internet. These clips existed, and previously, notably Sam Harris and various other people were unable to determine whether Stefan Molyneux was actually like a problematic figure or not. Sam Harris notably, I think, talked for a year that he couldn't work out if the smears against Stefan Molyneux were legitimate or not. Like, it's not that hard to detect, right? It's not.
We seriously need some water here.
So, yeah, But so there you go, Matt.
The little philosophy brain of yours to the table. Well, I suppose we can indulge you for a little while. I can't really go very far with it because, heaven forbid, we actually think about anything. But I certainly don't mind you tiring yourself if that's what you feel like.
Yeah, like all of those colorful images, the imagery he invokes, it's a bit of a smokescreen for the fact that what he's saying is pretty basic, right? He's complaining about the fact that when he says stuff, people don't always agree with him. Sometimes they, and he reckons that they're just not trying to understand, or they're being dismissive about his ideas. And it's the lack of self-awareness there, Chris, because as listeners will hear, he does all of those things when somebody says something to him that he doesn't immediately agree with, that isn't perfectly in line with what he already believes. He's incredibly dismissive. He gets really angry and pissed off. But, someone like this, they never actually go that far in terms of self-reflection.
No, and he's got a very, like he's talking about people looking down on others and like being pretentious and dismissive. And that's everything. That's what he is, right? He is exactly that. Even his tone in this whole delivery is superior and dismissive and like demonizing the art group, right? So he's talking about people who adopt these kind of, haughty airs as he does it. It's so annoying.
As he's doing right there. It reminds me of Joe Rogan talking about liberals. You go, these fucking liberals, like they just like, and they're so stupid, and they're little namby-pambies, and you can't reason with them. They refuse to listen, and the worst thing is that they look down on us. They don't respect us at all.
They're always saying mean things about us. And it's like,
they're so partisan, these liberals, and it's like, Joe. Anyway,
I know.
So yes, a good example there, Chris, of what he does.
So there we have, right, and this is laying the foundation for anybody that disagrees. Like you said originally, they can't think. They're peeing on you. This relates to demonic possession. And it actually, one thing that brought up to me was the Alex Jones kind of theatrics around when he, imitates demons going, rah, 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 they're thrashing, and it's a slightly more restrained delivery, but not very far from it. So in any case, there you go. So you've got that. And as I said, Matt, Stefan was a atheist, that kind of new atheist person, a bit like a James Lindsay type. But he since become, MAGA and pro ethno-nationalism and the right-wing audience tends to like Christianity a bit more. So let's see if you can detect a slight pivot here.
I had that, I was talking about the atheists today, and atheists way more superstitious than Christians, because at least Christian faith leads to objective reason, or objective rationality, but the faith that atheists have in the state, which is far more improbable than God, leads to like universal slaughter. So, yeah, I think it's the fact that people seem to be captured. I view people around me, not immediate people, of course, but I view the people I kind of interact with in the world as they've got all of these puppet threads going up to some demonic machinery. Literally, I mean, this is my view. They've got these threads, and they think they're moving themselves. They think that they're opening their mouth. They think they're making sounds, but they just sound like everyone else.
Laying it on a little bit thick there with everyone is an NPC robot rhetoric, right? Like, goddamn, Matt, these cult leaders, they really just go for the classics, right? Like, everyone's a demon puppet.
Yeah, the totalizing language is worth zeroing in on and just picking up on. Like, they want you dead. They want to commit violence to you. They want universal slaughter. They're possessed by demons. They're empty shells with their strings being pulled by puppets. I mean,
that they don't even recognize.
That's right. So this is the out group. This is everyone else who is not fully on board with this particular, let's just call it a cult.
Yeah, this worldview, shall we say. Yeah, and you heard there, Matt, the invocation that or atheists are way more like irrational, right? Their belief in the state. And that relates, of course, as you might imagine, to his kind of anti-communist stuff, right? Which a number of books, as you might anticipate. But yeah, this reminded me actually of the Vervaeke school of little side stories where people praise him for his insights. So listen to this.
I just, I had an emotional day. I just tell you that straight up. I had an emotional day because I'm reading it's the most passionate book in many ways that I've ever written, the book I'm working on, or just finishing up the audiobook reading of. I've got one more chapter to go, audiobook. I just finished the chapter 20. No, I think I have two more to go. You have two more chapters to go, and the book is about the sadness as you trace someone through life from early bad decisions to what happens later on when they can't escape those bad decisions. And I did the audiobook reading of just an absolutely horribly sad chapter. My wife cried reading it this morning. We did some work on it, and then I cried reading the audiobook this afternoon.
Everybody's crying. Like when he was talking about it, I had an emotional thing. I was reading a really emotional. At the beginning, I didn't anticipate that it was going to be his own
book.
works.
I was just watching a couple of Garth Marenghi clips on stage last night, Chris, and this is something Garth Marenghi would say. He was reading his own book, and he was absolutely floored by the profundity and the sheer emotional power of it.
His wife too, Matt, though. His wife too. Jordan Peterson's wife, she often tells him how brilliant. John Vervaeke's wife said that he was the most true Christian she's ever met. And Brett Wines, as we know, infamously has Heller Haying to keep him in check, right, when he's going off. It's almost like people shouldn't rely on their close relatives as, perhaps the most, objective, independent people. I don't know, Matt. I don't know. Call me crazy.
Well, wasn't Molyneux himself saying it was all women's fault? They're the ones enabling these terrible people. Maybe there's something to that, Chris.
Yeah. I said not his wife though, Matt. It's other people's wives. So
I see. I see.
You meet a schoolboy error there. So anyway, let's hear a little bit more with the call-in interaction. Because he's giving advice, he's providing feedback, but he got a bit distracted talking about people pissing on his watercolors. But what happens next?
Thank you for your answer. It anticipates something frightful that I get to probably look forward to this holiday season. I'm going to ask my a family member, I guess the Charlie Kirk question, how they reacted to it, and then get to. I anticipate. I think I know their reaction. I haven't asked them about it formally yet. I think they might have enjoyed it, and then I have to deal with the consequences of that.
And I'm sorry about that. That's a tough thing to do, but holy shyster balls, is it ever worth doing? Because there's going to come a time in the not too distant future when people will be informing on you or making things up. East Germany Stasi style, and you really can't have traitors in your midst in what is coming. You need people who are going to be with you 150%. So it's time to clean house. Sad though it is. But if the party and the position of tolerance and humanity giggles over a father and a husband being shot through the neck and bleeding out, you're not breaking bread with people, you're breaking bread with demons in control of people. And again, I'm not saying this is a literal truth, but this possession thing, like the bird, like how the possessions, the bird hand, the wide eyes, the like all the little facial tics and the bird hands and the staring eyes and the piercings. It's all just like, yeah, the demon's got me and I ain't even fighting it anymore. You see these horror movies. Oh no, the demon has possessed a child. Fight, Stacy, fight. You're just like, nah, I'm good.
Many of the big online talkers have done shows with Stefan Molyneux. Dennis Prager did. Douglas Murray did. Douglas Murray was happy to answer all questions until Stefan dropped a sentence about IQ and group differences.
I'm happy to be squatting in the fetid lap of a smoky skinned demon. Yeah, just where I want to be. It's perfect. Yeah, I couldn't be better. Things couldn't be better.
Yeah, I'm actually a little bit triggered by that. The Charlie Kirk thing. Like it just so quickly became this litmus test amongst conservatives where you had to show, so much respect for the man. You had to not say anything bad about him. He was the best.
Right, there's no reason that someone on the left would respect Charlie Kirk. Right? Charlie Kirk was primarily a right-wing polemicist and activist. If you're on the left, it's no more natural to have negative feelings about Charlie Kirk. It's also ill-advised to celebrate his murder publicly, but to have negative feelings about someone who is your political enemy is normal.
Best of all possible men, immediately promoted to demigod status. And I kind of, I mean, I'm inferring here, but I suspect that the guest there is taking the opportunity to do that with one of his relatives who is liberal leaning. And of course, Molyneux jumps on that because it is an excellent opportunity to cut them off. You pin them down, you make them say their loyalty oaths about Charlie Kirk. And if they don't meet the standard, then you cut them off because they're possessed by demons. And in the Civil War or the Revolution or whatever apocalyptic thing is coming, you need to sever all ties. Ugh, he's just
yeah. He's saying there's a ton of stuff, right? But there's the one, as you noted, like he's suggesting about the need to cut off people who don't adhere to your political interpretations. There he's presenting it like you'd have to be a demon, right? An absolute demon. And he's invoking the kind of people gleefully celebrating Charlie Kirk's death. But like, it doesn't have to be that, right? It can just be people that don't have this haloed reverence towards Charlie Kirk. And you can see that because he immediately starts talking about possession and demons and stuff. And you heard, Matt, that thing that always comes up where the people can be quick to denounce that. They're not talking about literal demons, but then go on to say, but it is actually very like what demon possession is described at. So you've got the disclaimer where people can say, well, he's not talking about literal demons, but he very much is talking about like stereotypical demon possession. And like this is outgroup demonization. It's in the fucking word.
You couldn't find a more textbook example. And also
so these guys are on the left, I'm on the right, but you often get clarity from your political opponents because they don't have your same loyalties and sensitivities, and they can call out BS when one is perhaps constitutionally more reluctant to do that for a warrior on your own side.
Shades of Pajot and Peterson and InfoWars guy.
Alex Jones, yeah, absolutely. Alex Jones. I mean, Alex Jones likes to invoke people being possessed by literal demons, but I mean, as we'll hear in other clips, Molyneux, it's all. And so this is towards the end of the call. Let's hear a little bit more.
And the superiority when people get beyond reason and they're beyond the reach of reason or compassion or humanity. Humanity! We are nothing if we don't reason. We do not inhabit our humanity if we don't reason. When somebody doesn't reason, doesn't listen to reason, doesn't listen to reason or evidence, they're telling you straight up.
Reason is useful. Reason has its place, but there are all sorts of other reactions we have that are often more useful to us and more valuable and more important than reason. It's not like reason has to be the king that should rule all other reactions.
That they have dehumanized themselves. And when they have dehumanized themselves, it follows as night follows day. They will dehumanize you. They will dehumanize others. They have become machines of murder. And it's best to get out of their way, like they're some giant threshing machine that's gone loose and languid in a field. It's gonna take you down. Hey, happy Halloween. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
He sure does love his evocative metaphors, doesn't he, Chris? A giant thrashing machine that's gotten loose and gone languid. The languid is a curveball in a field.
Yeah, machine of murder. And I like the hey, happy Halloween. Yeah, super upbeat. But so he's constantly invoking that these people look down on you. They dehumanize you. You know, they want you dead. Like we heard him invoke that kind of rhetoric, right? When he in the earlier clip when he was talking about like people not being libertarians. And here, it's again, you know, they're monstrous. They want you to die like Charlie Kirk. And then it's all projection because he's saying they will dehumanize you. You know, it's like they will present you like demons, like inhuman machines, right? It's like, or what they are like is people possessed by demons or monstrous machines. You're like, how do people not notice? Like, you know, the blatant double standards. It's shocking.
Projection is the right word there. Projection is the right word. Yeah, well, what I was hearing there was just, this is like textbook rhetoric, isn't it? You can follow the little rhetorical angle, which is these other bad people, if they don't agree with me, it means they can't reason. It means they're beyond the reach of reason or compassion, which means they've lost their humanity. And because they've lost their humanity, they've become these demons and they will straight up murder you if they get a chance. So we have to, like it's perfect example of rhetorical language.
Okay, I'll be back in less than 2 hours to talk to